Thank you for joining the Blueberry Educational Conference. I'm Zach Williams. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources Agent in Bacon County for the University of Georgia, and I'll be the moderator for this session. I'd like to thank Meister Media for sponsoring the 2024 Blueberry Educational Conference. And then with that, we'll get into the speakers. And up first on the list is Brandon Wade, our GBE president.
All right, thank you, Zach. Introduction, first off, for those that don't know me, my name is Brandon Wade. I am the Georgia Berry Exchange president, farm blueberries out of Alma, Georgia, also a packer and a wholesale nursery. So, does anybody here that hasn't been to a Georgia Berry Exchange meeting have any idea what Georgia Berry Exchange is? Any guesses? All right, so what the Georgia Berry Exchange is a voluntary membership organization designed for blueberry growers, farmers, equipment sales guys, fertilizer sales guys, and the main purpose of it is for promotion, research, and just general everything blueberry. So we're not a for-profit organization. Our entire purpose is to help blueberry growers with networking and just general information. We spend time donating to school systems, giving them blueberry-related materials, blueberry fact sheets, fun things. We attend trade shows like this, all trying to spread the word about Georgia blueberries and how much better they are than Florida and Michigan and New Jersey and, oh no, just for a good laugh, but it's really for the benefit of everybody. And so we've lost steam these past couple years, had a few changes, name changes, a few different president changes, officer changes, you name it. And we've lost our purpose a little bit. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because we need the growers to really tell us what they need. I've been a part of this organization for 12 years personally. My dad and my granddad and my uncle, they've all been parts of it since it was founded in the 1980s. Back then, we didn't have marketers that would give you food safety information. We didn't have really anything. Extension was stretched to the core, and the only way that Extension got funding and got the pressure to do their research was through the Georgia Berry Exchange, which back then it was called the Georgia Blueberry Growers Association. But it was the backbone of how growers expanded their operations, how they networked, how they figured out what to do next, what varieties are performing better, what are performing worse. Today, there's a lot more options, many more options of how do you get this information. Most of those options are for-profit centers. They give you information in exchange for you sell their product, or them sell your product, or just access into your business. I don't want access into your business. All I want is participation. If you show up, you get to say what's important to you, what we're missing in the blueberry industry, what we need work on together, and then not only that, but what politically do we need to do? There's always more than one way to get to the end solution, so we need ideas, we need grower support. Currently, the Georgia Berry Exchange is trying to get a management firm to help us in this task of upping membership and truly being representative of the members, the blueberry growers that we serve, and with that to lessen the load. Because we've had a lot of lofty goals and we just haven't had enough manpower to make it happen. This is a voluntary elected position with no pay, so it's tough to get guys to help and do the right thing. But so if you look up there, I've got my email address. It's not managed by some office staff. That goes directly to me. And that's my cell phone number. And that's a big risk to put that up on the screen, but I did it because we got to start communicating between each other better, between the growers. I've had several members that their biggest complaint about the exchange was they said it's clicky. Like, you know, I know these few guys over here, but I don't know the guys over here, and we just haven't really made that connection. So everybody that's in the room, if you're a blueberry grower, whether that be in your backyard or in a 200-acre field, would you just raise your hand for me if you're a blueberry grower? Excellent. Now, if you're not sitting next to somebody you know, do you even know any of those other blueberry growers? You ever talk to them? We're guilty of being long-time participants in this industry, but not always being contributors. And I didn't say all this to make everybody feel guilty. It's more the reality, the honesty of the situation, that we can do more for blueberry growers if we have their support. We can get more political traction if when we go to speak with legislators that we have all 300 signatures from blueberry growers instead of only 70 or 80. If we had more farmer membership than we did chemical sales guys membership, you know, this is the stuff that we got to do. So I've said my piece. What I would like to do really is, if anyone from the floor, because this is a small session here, just has a need, a blueberry need, what do you think that this association could bring to you better? For those that may not know, our main day-to-day thing is sending out e-blasts information, and then we do quarterly newsletters with sponsorship and research information articles in there as well. So anybody in the audience that has a meaningful suggestion, something that's important to you on your farm besides the obvious that you'd like to keep going? No? So, in addition to the Georgia Berry Exchange here, we also have a Georgia Blueberry Commodity Commission. For those that may not know, it's a mandatory program defined by the state of Georgia, and they assess pounds of blueberries and use that money for research. The Georgia Commodity Commission has gone to bat for us and on our behalf many times legislatively. One of the board members of this association and the Commodity Commission, Russ Goodman, has really been a friend to the blueberry industry and has pushed in many ways to try to make sure that we're treated fairly and from a labor standpoint, from a legislative and food safety standpoint as well. Those guys only know what to do, you know, what we really need to do whenever we tell them. And so what I'm asking from you all, because I don't have a big presentation, I don't have a list of our accomplishments in front of me. I was stretched a little thin on making it down here, but just if you have an idea and you don't want to say it here, catch me after. I'll be sitting right outside the auditorium. Love to have a chat with you. And if you ever had any interest in joining not just as a member, but joining on the board and a service position, we would be happy to talk about that. It's a great place for that networking and communication, and maybe build a few friends that you could just call, hey, I need a little bit of advice on this herbicide. You know, what rates are you using, instead of having to make that full circle, talking to guys that have never used the product before. There's a lot to be gained. Exciting things could happen if we're all a part of it. And I'll jump off of my soapbox. Send me an email, call me. Love to help somebody get going in Blueberries, or maybe put you in contact with the right person. Anything we can do for you, be happy to.
Randy, one thing.
Yes, sir.
I had a friend called me one day and said, Shane, why you didn't tell me about the disaster program? I said, well, I just called in and told in to send the email to all the Georgia Berry Exchange members. I said, well, I've been trying to tell you, you get through time. You didn't spend $300 to be a Georgia Berry Exchange member. You lost $150,000 on disaster program. So this is why we need to get in contact with them.
So did y'all hear me?
Say it again.
Okay. Had a friend call me and said that, Shane, why you didn't tell me about the disaster program? So, well, I told Ann to publish in the newsletter and get it on e-blast to remind growers to apply for it. I said, well, you didn't get the newsletter? He said, no. I said, well, that's what I've been trying to tell you. You didn't spend $300 and it cost you $125,000. Real story. We need to be a part. We need to keep this organization going. I think in numbers, we've got the political power to do it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Shane. Good real-world example, and that was disaster money from 17, 18, 19 when they came out with the program, and it was just that simple. This guy, I'm not going to name any names, but making plenty of money off of his blueberries, can't set aside $300 to be a part of the organization. And for clarity, if you're a small farmer, your membership dues would not be $300. They start at $75. What you get for that $75 is regular e-blasts, updated information about upcoming events, not just our events, but other related events, pesticide classes and that kind of thing, and then also that newsletter that I mentioned. And as a member, if you had products or services that you wanted to advertise, we have a lot of advertising slots as well. So a lot of ways that you could come and be a part of the club. Any questions or anything from the floor? Any other history that you'd like to hear about? If not, again, I'll go ahead and move out of the way and let Zach come and take it back over. Thank you all for your time, and we'll see you around the show. Got it, Zach?
Moving right along, up next we have Lisa DeVetter to talk about the honeybee hive placement and density.
Well, thank you, Zach, for that introduction. Again, I'm from Washington State. We have some excellent blueberries there, and just kind of piggybacking off what Brandon said, I think it's just as good as a Georgia blueberry. So it's a great industry, and I'm happy to be here to hopefully answer this question: honeybee hive placement and density, does it matter? Well, long story short, yes, but in the subsequent few minutes, I'm going to explain kind of the devil in the details and the nuance, so that hopefully if you are planning your pollination strategy for this upcoming year, you have a bit more information to guide your decision making. So the information I'm going to be presenting on is from a large national project with collaborators from not just Washington State University, but Michigan State University, Oregon State University, Cornell University, and the University of Florida. And we represent a team of horticulturalists like myself, entomologists with specialization in honeybees, as well as ecologists and statisticians. So it's a great team. I'm really excited to tell you what we've learned over the past few years. First, though, let's just establish the importance of pollination for blueberry. So blueberry does require insect-mediated pollination. There's a handful of examples, very minor at this point, where there's some cultivars that don't, but in general, commercially speaking, to optimize on berry size, fruit set, and ultimately your yield outcomes, you want to make sure you have pollination. And honeybees, if we look at pollination of blueberry globally, are the primary pollinator. But also what we see in the literature is that pollination is often deficient, meaning you're not able to be maximizing on your berry size, your fruit set, and again, your yield. There's another factor here that provides some rationale in terms of some of the questions that we are attempting to answer through this research, and that's the declines in honeybee health that beekeepers have reported after pollinating blueberry. And we don't know why that is necessarily, if it's unique to the pollen of blueberry, the foraging resources while they're in blueberry, or pesticide exposure, but we're trying to contribute information to figure out that mystery. All in all, this really is supposed to underpin that blueberry pollination is important, and growers as well as their beekeepers need strategies to reliably improve pollination. So again, this is the team project. It's not just me alone. I want to highlight we've not just got our team that I mentioned earlier, but we also work closely with grower cooperators and beekeepers, and this project is funded through the United States Department of Agriculture. So I'm going to start off by talking about hive placement. This was work done by Kayla Brower, who was a former master's student in my program, as well as the contributions of Dr. Maxime Erras, who was a postdoctoral researcher. And our objective here was to evaluate the effects of different honeybee hive placement strategies on blueberry pollination and pesticide drift. So a little bit about why we focused on hive placement, or why our growers and beekeepers asked us to look at hive placement. Hives are often dispersed and placed right adjacent to the edge of the field, like what you see here, a field from Washington State. And the idea is honeybees don't necessarily like to pollinate and forage on blueberry, so if we're placing the hives right next to the field, then maybe they're less likely to forage on other plants in the landscape and are more likely to pollinate your blueberry. However, this placement strategy could impact exposure to pesticides, because during bloom, this is often a time too where the crop needs to be protected from things like botrytis and mummyberry, so fungicide applications are very real and a part of the bloom time period. And if we have those hives placed, the likelihood of drift could be greater. Now, there's another strategy that some beekeepers and growers believe is helpful, and that's clumping, or concentrating hives away from the field edge in fewer drop locations. That's also really efficient for beekeepers, especially if they have a lot of honeybees they have to deploy within a short period of time. But some growers think that might lead to declines in pollination, and we really don't know. And so this is the background for the research to look at how hive placement might impact pollination outcomes, as well as potentially exposure to pesticides from drift. So this was a large project. We had experimental sites in Washington, Oregon, and in Michigan. In Washington, we used Duke, as well as Oregon utilized the cultivar Duke. We had 12 fields in Washington that we studied in 2021 and 2022. 6 and 8 fields in Oregon used in 2021 and 2022, respectively. And Michigan utilized blue crop, and there were 8 fields in both years of the experiment. And we had this paired design, so we had sites with clumped and sites with dispersed placement strategies, and this wasn't correlated with the stocking density, so we made sure to control that variable since it could impact our data. So here's an image of our treatments again. We have clumped, what you see here on the left, where we had our pallets of hives aggregated together away from the edge of the field, and then we had our dispersed strategy where the pallets were right against the edge of the crop field. I want to take a moment too and explain how we collected these data. These approaches are the same for the next project I'm going to be speaking about as well. So our first goal was to measure honeybee visitation and look at if these treatments impacted the number of bees visiting the flowers. So how we did that is we did transect walks. We had 4 transects that were parallel to rows in the center of the field, so we can get an idea of the average pollinator activity in our blueberry fields. And these transects were 330 feet long. And we did that in all of our different locations. And throughout the bloom period and under various weather conditions, we monitored bee activity. We also had 5 bushes per transect, or 20 bushes per field site, where we looked at metrics such as flower count and then later on the number of berries from those flowers to determine fruit set. We also looked at fruit weight and seed set. One reason we look at seed set is because the number of seeds is an indicator of pollination. So more seeds, more honeybee visitations, better pollination, and that can be related also to berry size. So again, we had our sites, some were dispersed, and some had this clumped configuration. For pesticide exposure, we used a passive sampling technique where we had these silicone bands that were mounted on the exterior of the hives, and they were placed a few days after the honeybees arrived at the field site, and they were removed shortly before the honeybee hives were removed. So they were out there for the duration of the blueberry bloom period. And we had 10 bands per field. 5 bands were facing towards the field, and then 5 bands were oriented away from the field to see not just how these placement strategies impacted pesticide residue levels, but also how they were oriented towards the field. Then samples were sent to Scott McArt's lab at Cornell University and analyzed using a combination of gas and liquid chromatography. And I'm only going to be presenting on 2021 pesticide residue data because 2022 data are pending due to some equipment issues in the McArt lab. So what did we find out? So first we're going to look at honeybee visitation. This figure here is showing honeybee visitation under optimal foraging conditions where temperatures were 55 degrees Fahrenheit or greater and sunny to partially sunny. We have our honeybees per transect within the hour, and then we have our 2 years, 2021, 2022. Michigan is represented in red and called Midwest here, and then Oregon and Washington is in purple. That's represented as the Pacific Northwest. And hopefully you can see too, we have our different treatments. What we saw, interestingly and consistently across our regions and the years, is that clumping actually led to an increase in honeybee visitation under optimal weather conditions. This was really interesting. We looked at also foraging under suboptimal conditions, so when weather was below 55 degrees Fahrenheit or cloudy, maybe some rain, and what we saw that clumping didn't negate the negative effects of weather conditions on honeybee activity. What about pollination outcomes? So again, we looked at fruit set, berry weight, as well as seed count per berry. These figures are small. I did this in the interest of time, and it's also a very simple message. Over all of these different metrics of pollination success or outcomes, we saw no treatment effects. And this might be due to the fact that even though we saw differences in honeybee visitation, even at that lower visitation level, it was still sufficient for these indicators of pollination. And we see this in the literature as well, that there's almost a plateau where, you can only take there's only so many number of honeybees that need to visit to maximize on fruit set, berry weight, and seed count per berry. And that's what we believe we're seeing here with these data. Now, turning our attention to the pesticide residue data, we detected 49 different pesticides in 2021. And when we look at the data across the different states, we saw that placement had no effect on residue levels, whereas in Washington and Oregon, orientation did. So when we had the bands facing the field edge, there was greater amounts of pesticide residues than facing away. And that makes sense if we're thinking about sprayer activities and drift moving on those hives. You'll see, though, there is a tremendous amount of variation. That's what these bars represent, and I'll talk about that variation in a moment. But again, you can see we have our mean pesticide residues in parts per billion. We have here different states represented by different colors, and then we have clumped and dispersed and our different orientations away and towards. And as we looked at this data, we noticed the large patterns of variation, but this trend for clumped sites to have seemingly less concentration of pesticide residues, and we thought, well, maybe management might have a role here, different sprayer technologies, etc. And so we had a nice situation in Washington where we had a single grower cooperator with 5 different field sites. 3 of them had the clump strategy, and then 2 of the sites were dispersed. So we looked at a subset of the data in those particular 5 field sites, and with management held consistent, what we saw in this case study approach is that clumping actually did lead to statistically lower amounts of pesticide residues than our dispersed treatment strategy, whereas the orientation away or towards had no effect. So that's what these data are showing. This is our dispersed treatment. This is facing away from the field edge. This is facing towards the field edge. So you can see just much greater amounts of pesticide residues in this situation. Now, distance likely has a big role in the amount of drift hitting these silicone strips that we're detecting. So in 2023, what we did in Washington is we placed silicone bands that we use for passive pesticide sampling at different locations to understand about this potential gradient effect with distance. So we had silicone bands that were placed about 80 feet within the field, and then we had them placed right along the edge of the field to represent that dispersed treatment configuration that I mentioned earlier. And then they were placed about 82, 164, and so forth away from the field edge. Again, these were out throughout the entire bloom period. This time we sent them to Synergistic Pesticide Lab, and what we saw that distance did have an effect on the amount of residues that we were detecting. So the field level concentrations of residues were statistically the same as right adjacent to the field edge, which would be what those dispersed hives would be encountering. When we move to 82, 164, and 230, we see a statistically significant drop-off in the pesticide residues. So again, the distance does have an effect. What we plan to do this season is work a little bit more within that 0 to 82 distance range and see where that decay curve essentially is across different farms. And hopefully this might be good for recommending not just placement of honeybee hives, but also potentially insectary strips for beneficial pollinators so they're not getting impacted by drift as well. So some of our conclusions for that first experiment was clumping increased honeybee visitation, and the reason we think this might be, there's not a lot of evidence for this in the literature, is that when the hives are clumped together, there's a higher likelihood of an individual worker drifting and entering a colony that's not her own. And so she can be conveying to other foragers where resources are in the landscape, ideally other blueberry flowers. And so this might be leading to increased fidelity of all of those different individuals among all those hives close together to pollinate blueberry flowers in the landscape. Definitely deserves more research, but this is the best explanation we could come forward with talking with entomologists and looking at the literature. Again, we saw this trend for lower pesticide residues when we had hives clumped as opposed to dispersed. And takeaway from this, from a practical application standpoint, is that growers and beekeepers can work together and hopefully increase honeybee activity and reduce chances of pesticide exposure from these residues by clumping hives. And I wrote in certain landscapes. So when we look at the data, we certainly see some situations where clumped hives had greater amounts of pesticide residues than dispersed hives. And if we look at what was around those hives, we see that there's other fields and other crop systems that have pesticide applications at the same time that those bees are placed. So it's important to think about the landscape and what else is happening outside of your blueberry fields in relationship to where those honeybees are being placed if you want to reduce exposure. I do want to point out too, we're just looking at the amount of residues on the hives. At this point, we don't necessarily know the relationship between the exterior levels of pesticide residues and what's actually inside the hive and hive health. And that's something that we hope to elucidate a little bit later on through this project and others. The other important piece that beekeepers were really excited about is that clumping does promote beekeeper efficiencies without compromising crop pollination. So it's a lot faster for them to deploy hives, to do any maintenance on the hives while they're in the blueberry fields, and then also remove the hives. And again, we're not seeing any declines in crop pollination, potentially even benefiting the crop by increased honeybee visitation. So that's the first experiment. With the remaining amount of time that I have, I want to highlight some work that was done in this project from Lauren Goldstein. Lauren Goldstein was also a former master's student advised by Dr. Rufus Isaacs at Michigan State University. I was fortunate enough to serve on her committee. And her goal was to better understand the relationship between honeybee hive density and blueberry pollination. So a little bit of rationale about stocking density. Having an adequate number of healthy honeybee hives is important for blueberry and other pollinator-dependent crops that have high bloom densities and are also in landscapes where the contributions from wild pollinators might be reduced. Now, there are recommendations for stocking densities. Here's an example from Michigan State University. But if you look at the cultivars, these are cultivars that are largely not being grown or phasing out when we look at the northern highbush blueberry industry in North America. And there's reason to believe as we shift to new cultivars with higher bloom densities, or as we have higher planting densities in modern blueberry production systems, that we have more flowers per unit area, and we might need more bees or hives per unit area as well. Now, if we look at the literature, and I've contributed to the literature on this as well with my program, we see inconsistent responses to changing honeybee hive density. Sometimes if you increase honeybee hive density, you see a very strong response in terms of increased bee visitation and pollination outcomes and indicators of yield, but sometimes you don't see that response. And part of that might be due to this component called hive strength, which is an indicator of the population size within a hive, or the number of individuals in that colony that can forage and provide pollination services. So you might have 8 hives to the acre, but if there are 8 hives to the acre and they're all poor quality hives with low number of individuals, that's not going to be the same as 8 hives to the acre if you have 30,000 bees per colony or greater. So there's some nuance there that stocking density doesn't get into per se. So for this project, the experimental sites were in Michigan and in Florida. I'm just going to be presenting on the Michigan data set. That's all the data that we have analyzed right now. This was also set up as a pair design, so 6 pairs, fields that were stocked at high density or low density, and the cultivar studied here was blue crop in 2021 and 2022. So here are some visual examples of these stocking density treatments in Michigan. On the left, we have our low density, 2 to 4 hives per acre, and then the higher densities, 4 to 6 hives per acre. And these little cursors here, that just is representing a pallet of colonies. So the data that were collected were the same as the data I collected for the previous experiment. However, there are a couple things that are different that I wanted to highlight here. So what Lauren and the Michigan team did is that they also tried to estimate through a non-invasive technique the strength of the colonies. And Lauren calculated this metric called stocking strength. So stocking strength is an attempt to try to take into account stocking density as well as the strength of the hives. Let's see if I can get this video to work here. Well, maybe not here. So what stocking strength is how to estimate stocking strength. So what you do is you count the number of returning foragers within a 1-minute interval. For this experiment, it was from 10 representative hives per site, and then you multiply that by the stocking density or hives per acre. So again, that gives you an estimate of the activity or the strength of the hives in relation to the density per unit area. And so she was really interested if this would be a good way to link the number of bees visiting flowers and pollination outcomes. So let's look at her data. There's a lot more data here, but I'm just going to try to highlight the take-home messages here. So first I want to make sure that we can link honeybee visitation to the blueberry flowers within the transects to our pollination outcomes. So what we have here is we have honeybees per transect on both of these figures for both years, and we have seed set, which again is a really good indicator of pollination success. And then we have this estimate called estimated partial yield, and this is an estimate of flowers per acre, fruit set, and berry weight. And it's trying to estimate yield considering the fact that there's other things that contribute to ultimate yields as well, such as irrigation, nutrient management plans. And here she was able to very clearly and significantly show that honeybee visitation is correlated or linked to seed number per berry and estimated partial yield. It wasn't related to fruit set or berry weight though. Okay, so we were able to link the number of bees visiting flowers to indicators of yield. What about that stocking strength estimate here? So we were able to very clearly show in this project that stocking strength was better related to honeybee visitation than stocking density and colony strength alone. So I think this really shows that It's not just density per field, it's capturing the number of foragers in your field as well. So the next figure that I was going to show is going to try to map out this relationship. So number of bees on your blueberries is linked to pollination outcomes and pollination success. Number of bees visiting the flowers is linked to estimated partial yield and these pollinator outcomes. And then stocking strength was better linked to honeybee visitation than stocking density or colony strength alone. So I'll tell you where you can look up how to estimate stocking strength for your field site. But again, putting it together, I think this map is a really important way to show it. So what we were able to show is that bees per flower is positively and significantly related to pollination and yield, as well as the number of bees within a transect. What we're able to show is that stocking density, the number of bees per acre, is not significantly related to bee visitation. So it's not a very good and a meaningful way to stock your fields appropriately. Whereas stocking strength, which encompasses both of these, is, and colony strength to a lesser degree. So some takeaways. Number one, when it comes to the clumping experiment, clumping hives promotes beekeeper efficiencies and reduces the potential exposure to hives, to pesticide residues in certain landscapes, and we don't see a loss in crop pollination. For the density work, growers and beekeepers attempting to improve pollination by honeybees can think about increasing not just the number of hives within their landscape by manipulating stocking density, but increasing the number of strong hives. Well, how do you estimate strong hives if you don't want to open up the colony yourself? It's a very invasive technique. Some beekeepers also don't want you to do that. Well, you can learn how to estimate the number of return foragers, which links to the strength and allows you to come up with that stocking strength estimate that I mentioned earlier. So if you have a phone, you can scan this QR code. We have a video here that shows you how to estimate return forager counts. This is something you can do from your truck. It's very simple, non-invasive, and it helps you begin to have a dialogue with your beekeeper if your hives are not of adequate strength. And then you can also multiply that by your stocking density, and that can give you an idea if you're reaching target levels of pollination. And we're hoping to later on come up through more global analyses of data from all our different states, what threshold levels of stocking strength are for good pollination. The other thing I wanted to mention too, this was some interesting work that we learned in Washington, is if you can, try to factor in the number of hives within a 6-mile radius of your field. What we found out that stocking levels on a per field basis is not very well linked to honeybee activity, but there's contributions from other hives in the landscape, whether from nearby apiaries or other fields that pollinate blueberry as well. This is a little bit difficult to do, but again, it's just showing the fact that bees move, bees migrate, and if you're able to consider bees in your landscape, not just within a field you're stocking, that might lead you to have better success when it comes to stocking at appropriate levels in your blueberry fields. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Thanks to Zach for helping navigate the technical issues. If there's any time for questions, I'm happy to take them. All right. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Josh Vanderwide. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Horticulture at Michigan State University. I'm going to be talking today about blueberry flavor, but also how plant growth regulators might be able to be used to improve fruit quality in general, but also potentially modulate fruit ripening rate and potentially the harvest date. So it's nice to be here. In Michigan right now, we are getting about 6 to 8 inches of snow. So someone was complaining that it's cold here earlier today, and I beg to differ. It's actually quite warm. So a few things before I get into the bulk of the topic of my presentation, just to kind of provide a bit of context. I know, of course, I'm growing a lot of southern highbush and rabbit-eye varieties down in this region of the U.S. Of course, in Michigan, we're growing exclusively northern high bush varieties, so you might not be familiar with the variety they'll be talking about, but you might be familiar with the concept, or these first two concepts. The first is that Michigan growers are working with very old cultivars. This is behind New Jersey, the second oldest blueberry producing region in the world. And so we're still producing some of those original varieties like Rubel and Jersey. I was participating in a project where they took out a 75-year-old planting of Jersey. So now that blueberry production is becoming, production is increasing globally, but also in the U.S., growers are really trying to remove these older cultivars and replant them with newer ones to remain competitive. But these are our three top varieties here in terms of acreage. Probably Blue Crop is number one now. But Jersey has been for a long time. It's a processing variety. Blue Crop is a pretty high yielding variety for us, but it's known for having poor flavor, and that's always been an issue. Elliott is a late harvest variety, so it's kind of commanded a good market value for many years. However, the flavor is relatively poor, and now with South American competition, it's really not commanding that market share of the market anymore. So if you just kind of consider these three varieties, it's about 70% of acreage in Michigan. The average release date is 1950, so that's we're really working with old genetics here. And this is the graph on the right here shows some results from a survey I conducted with growers in Michigan, just asking, what varieties are you looking to remove first and replant? And top of that list is Jersey, of course. This is because processing just doesn't command the price that it used to. Liberty is second, and it's mainly because Jersey and Liberty have this issue with the stem gall wasp, which is kind of, to my knowledge, something that we only have an issue with in Michigan. And then Blue Crop and Elliott are lower on the list. And so when I started my position about a year and a half ago, I thought, well, ultimately nothing can really beat a new cultivar, but we're probably going to have this acreage of these two cultivars for quite some time, and so maybe there's something I can do in the meantime to fix these issues of poor flavor and kind of the late ripening time. So, so I come from a wine grape background, and I would say that wine grapes are probably the most manipulated fruit crops out there, between crop load management, canopy management, irrigation, deficit irrigation. But blueberries are a lot different. You really can't do any of those things with blueberries. And so one of the solutions that I thought was, potentially a solution to the problem were PGRs. And there again is an issue with PGRs because not very many are registered for blueberries, and these two graphs really highlight that. This is from a manuscript where my student Dan and I are working on. Dan is the person doing all of this PGR work. Both graphs are the same in the sense that they show across the horizontal axis on the bottom all of the major fruit crops grown in the U.S. So starting with apples on the left, raspberries on the right, this shows, the gray bars show the number of plant growth regulators registered for each of these crops. So of course, tree fruits, starting with apples and pears, have a lot of PGRs registered for them because crop load management is so important. And then, of course, raspberries all the way on the right there, to my knowledge, are not any PGRs registered for this crop. But these blue lines and circles at the top for both graphs show the total production value of that crop. On the left shows, I think the last report from the USDA was in 2022, I think. And so when you look at that, we have blueberries sort of being eighth on the list for production value, but also the number of PGRs registered. So that really aligns if you consider all the fruit crops grown throughout the U.S. But blueberries are, of course, one of the fastest growing fruit crops globally. And so maybe certainly the need for PGRs is going to increase as a solution for blueberry growers. And when you consider the change in production over the past decade, which is what the graph on the right shows, blueberries are second on that list in terms of production value behind wine grapes. And so that, I think, really emphasizes the fact that despite blueberries growing so quickly, in production and acreage, we're really lagging behind in plant growth regulators being a solution for growers. So when I was in my postdoc working with wine grapes, I did some work with this plant growth regulator class of hormones called jasminates, trying to improve flavor of wine grapes. There's this pretty strong link between production of certain flavor-related aroma compounds like terpenes, which I guess the way to really relate that to the lay audience is kind of essential oils are mostly made up of terpenes, so very usually pleasant aromas and flavors in fruits and other crops are usually pretty high in terpenes. And so we showed that grapes are very sensitive, or terpene production in grapes is very sensitive at the very beginning of ripening. Even though terpenes don't accumulate until 4 or 5 weeks later in the ripening process, spraying jasminates at once at this timing, right at the very beginning of ripening, doubled the concentration of these compounds. And about a week after I started my position, the breeding lab at University of Florida published this paper showing that terpenes are actually really important for mediating the chemical basis of blueberry aroma and consumer acceptability or consumer liking of blueberries. And so I thought that's great. That kind of lines up well. Maybe I should kind of just copy and paste this experiment from grapes to blueberries. So when grapes are most sensitive is right at the beginning of this process called veraison, which is on the left here. It shows right in the clusters, right when you have a few berries turning from green to pink or red. And the ripening process for grapes, as I said, is 4 or 5 weeks long, but for blueberries it's just a few days. And so it's really kind of, I assumed, would be the stage when they're most sensitive for blueberries as well. I think it's important to say that when we're doing anything with hormones or plant growth regulators, these are all hormones found endogenously and naturally within the fruit. I couldn't find one for blueberries, but this is the ripening curve of strawberries considering the concentration of jasminates in the fruit. So this is something that we're essentially supplementing, hoping to supplement a little bit more of something that's already there to improve a process. So when it comes to our experimental design, we want to improve the flavor, and Blue Crop was a variety that we have 6,000 or 7,000 acres of in Michigan, but it's known for having poor flavors. So we wanted to use this variety and be very targeted with this as a potential solution. We sprayed these compounds when about 15% of the fruit were blue. And we tried to mimic a production cycle. So in Michigan, we're harvesting less often than you probably do down here. It's usually about once a week. And so 3 picks usually you harvest most of the fruit on the plant. So we were trying to look at fruit quality across 3 picks if possible. And I'll also mention we were using 2 different jasminates. One is commercially available called prohydrojasmine and is registered for grapes. And the second is methyl jasminate, which is a product in the works by several companies, but it's not yet registered. So I'll start with the most interesting results, and we can kind of keep these in mind as we continue looking through the rest of the data. So there's about 2 to 3 dozen different flavor-related aroma volatile compounds that we detect in blueberries, but really only about 6 are important for consumer perception of blueberry flavor based on their concentration and how much you can actually smell them regardless of their concentration. And what we saw, just to kind of summarize all this very quickly, is that one of our methyl jasminate treatments, we saw again about double the concentration of a lot of different aroma compounds, including terpenes, compared to our control treatments. And we didn't really see that big of a difference in the prohydrojasmine treatments. So kind of going forward, we're thinking that this methyl jasminate treatment at a 5 millimolar concentration is something that might work. In the rest of these slides I'll show for this project, I've highlighted, put a red box around this same treatment just so we can kind of keep in mind that's the one that hypothetically improves the flavor. Are there any other positive or negative effects on fruit quality that we should keep in mind. So again, for this project, we were able to keep track of 3 harvests in the first year. So considering just the size of the fruit, that's something that you all as industry members really care about. Really wasn't much of an effect for this particular treatment across all the harvests. You notice all the similarity, though, in that this treatment on the very right tended to be significantly decreased, and that carried through all the harvests. So in the second year, we had some issues with the field we were working with. The grower got there before we could to harvest the first pick, so we ended up moving this whole experiment to a different field, which I think caused some issues. We did so out of necessity, but the data is not as consistent in the second year as it was in the first. So what we notice here is not really much of a change in berry weight in the first year, or I should say in the second harvest of the second year. But in the third harvest of the second year, we do see a significant decrease in fruit size in this third harvest for the 5 millimole methyl jasmonate treatment. So that's something to consider. We kind of considering these results for the from the first year, we thought, let's add a treatment in the middle between 1 and 5 millimole. So that's why we have 2 extra treatments here at 3 millimole for both compounds. And for that middle treatment, we don't see a reduction in the second year. So we're going to replicate this for another year and see if we see the same thing. So this is looking at total soluble solids, which are just essentially the sweetness of the fruit, sugar concentration in the fruit. And this is a pretty interesting result for this first year, and that again, across all 3 harvests, we see a significant increase in Brix or total soluble solids for both of the methyl jasmonate treatments. So that's a positive result. And then in the second year, though, we don't see any difference. And this is, I have a background in cultural practices and with wine grapes, and this is something that we see so frequently, is that we see something in one year and not the other. There's typically a pretty strong environmental effect on these types of results. So finally, looking at the firmness of the fruit, we were kind of expecting that the firmness might be increased using these treatments, but for the first 2 harvests, for this 5 millimole treatment, they're actually significantly decreased. And then in the third harvest, it's increased, so kind of strange. But in the second year, for this second harvest, all the methyl jasmonate treatments increased the firmness, and there was no effect on the third harvest. So certainly something that's not as stable as the fruit size or sugar concentration in the fruit. Some takeaways so far. I think there might be kind of an optimal concentration that doesn't decrease the firmness or fruit size, increases Brix, but also improves flavor-related volatiles in the fruit as well. This 3 millimole concentration, but that's something we need to test out for another season or maybe 2, just to really validate that that's something that is consistently effective. The verdict is out whether it improves flavor, though. When you're thinking about quality, these are some of the things I was talking about today, but flavor is really something that consumers determine. So we did a little preliminary trial with our sensory science lab last year, and that treatment that improved the flavor volatile concentration, you can actually taste the difference in the fruit. It was really cool. So something that we need to validate with a larger test this year, but we're pretty excited about that. So we didn't see consistent results between the 2 seasons, but I think this probably has a lot to do with this issue with the experimental design in the second year and having to apply these treatments after the first pick instead of before. There's generally some trade-offs in fruit quality along the season. For improving quality in the first harvest, there tends to be an opposite effect towards the end, which we've kind of seen. So I think that probably has something to do with that. But again, we'll replicate this for another year or so. And I think what's really important, I've heard of fruit people mention this to me, but there's some work done, I think here in Georgia, with rabbit eye cultivars that showed that methyl jasmonate applications improved fruit drop. And so that's something to keep in mind. Something that we never saw in our experiment, and we were looking for it. We didn't also notice any kind of a difference in like the retention force or how much force it requires to pull off the fruit, which I think is important too. So the second issue that I'll mention is this Elliott cultivar that we have. It's one of our late season varieties. It's also about 25% of acreage in Michigan. It's always commanded a very high market value because of that. We're one of the northernmost producers in the United States, and this is the latest ripening cultivar. So between the end of the northern hemisphere production cycle and the beginning of the southern hemisphere production cycle, there was always this really nice window where growers in Michigan could command a good price for this particular cultivar, but that has changed dramatically over the past few years. And so there's not really so much competition from the Pacific Northwest, even though the harvest window is pretty similar. Ultimately we're shipping our fruit to different places in the U.S. than the Pacific Northwest, including British Columbia. The issue is that essentially Peruvian imports are kind of taking over this window, and so that's been a huge issue for growers. And so the thought was maybe we could advance the ripening by a week or so. Growers said that if that was the case, then we could kind of command a better price for the fruit. So that was our goal here. And just to kind of explain this again, this is a hormone that's found naturally in ripening fruit. The other hormone you might be more familiar with is ethylene, but blueberries are a fruit that are probably more non-climacteric than climacteric, meaning they rely more on abscisic acid or ABA than ethylene for ripening. And so there's actually a very large concentration of ABA in blueberries, and this is what this graph shows. There's a pretty steep accumulation as they go from being green to red. And so again, the thought is let's just supplement a little bit more of that and see if we can speed up the ripening process. So in reality, we have two late season varieties that are grown in the US and in Michigan. And so we didn't just do this experiment on Elliott, we did this on Aurora as well. Pretty similar treatment application timing. Probably the only difference is that we were applying more treatments. So we had some interesting results kind of in a preliminary trial that we did last year, where we noticed that ABA had the ability to advance the harvest date by probably 3 to 4 days at a relatively low concentration. And so we thought, let's just let's do a full concentration curve, like a kind of classical PGR study, just to see the full effect. And that's what we did this past summer in both Elliott and Aurora. These graphs show the whole plant blue fruit. It's hard to come up with a good name for this metric, but this is the percentage of fruit on the plant that are blue. So like I said, we tend to harvest about 3, maybe 4 times in our production systems rather than picking every few days. And so what this is showing is that we're generally picking a day or two before the growers, so we're picking it when about 35, maybe 40% of the fruit on the plant are blue. And so you can kind of see the multiple picks that we have here. This second graph on the right basically shows that there was no effect on increasing the percentage of fruit on the plant that were ripe or blue, like we saw in the first year, although if you probably can't see it, but it does very closely follow a trend with increasing concentration, which is pretty cool. So if we were to pick out the top and bottom treatment, for example, we would probably see a difference. So it might actually be advancing ripening by a day or two, but not significantly. And that might be because we also saw a pretty significant increase in fruit size at a few different concentrations. So larger fruit means it takes longer to ripen, and that might explain why we didn't see that result in this year. But this is actually kind of unexpected. We didn't really expect to see any improvement in the fruit size, but from 200 to 600 ppm, we did. And then we also didn't expect to see an increase in sugar concentration in the fruit, but we did. And that happened from a range of 600 to 800 ppm. So the 600 ppm treatment seems to be able to improve fruit quality, which is pretty cool. Importantly, we also didn't see a change in in firmness. And this is important. If we look at these graphs here, we'll start with the one on the right because the one on the left I made, and I think I realize now that it's pretty confusing to look at. So what this shows on the right is that ethylene, which is that other ripening-related hormone, in research, especially in southern highbush and rabbit-eye, has been shown in multiple studies to decrease the firmness and increase fruit drop. So it's a senescent related hormone, so it's basically causing the fruit to ripen very quickly and then fall off the plant. So we were skeptical of choosing ethylene or ethifon as our, compound to use. So we wanted to use the other one, which was ABA, and it seemed to be effective. We didn't see a change in fruit firmness. So 3 conclusions here. ABA didn't consistently advance the ripening and harvest date, but some unexpected results were that it improved the fruit size, sugar concentration, and we're doing some other work looking at flavonoid composition and likely aroma composition too, just to see if there are any changes. And importantly, this occurred without impacting fruit firmness. So, and just a few acknowledgments as I wrap up. My graduate student Dan has been leading this project, and I think it's been a lot of field work, especially taking those color counts, but Dan is a 5th-generation farmer and he loves being out in the field, and so it's been a great project for him. We received some funding from a few sources, and I especially want to say thanks to our farm collaborators. We're ultimately taking up space at people's farms to do this work, and it's pretty invasive work too. It requires a lot of phone calls and texts and scheduling, and it's pretty invasive, and so just a huge thank you to folks that we were working with in order to do this work. So that's all. Thanks. I don't know if there's any time for questions, but yep. I think it's coming.
Yeah, I was curious about a couple things. I had questions about the ABA. I think that's fascinating. First of all, I was curious, is there such a thing as a quick test for something besides TSS to kind of gauge what, especially for terpenes? Is anybody coming up with some quick and dirty way to at least look at total terpenes to see if it can go on from there?
I don't think so. There was an old assay that was used in the 90s and early 2000s looking at, I forget what it was called, glycoconjugate something, but that was thought to be quick but never really correlated with, I guess, more for bound terpenes. But so we use the SPEMI GCMS method, and it's a real pain. It's very time consuming, very technical, but it's really the only way to do things well. Unlike other things that can be measured, volatiles are very difficult to analyze well, as you probably know. So, so we were just very technical about it and just do it the long way.
So my other question was, I was thinking about storage. If using ABA goes forward and it's useful for increasing terpenes, I don't know what the literature is as far as an association either with ABA and storage life or with ABA and terpenes or terpene content and storage life in blueberry.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll point out really quickly. So the jasminates are the hormones that increase the terpenes. ABA, we haven't looked into that yet, but there is some really cool research that I think is about to be published by an old lab mate of mine from British Columbia, and they show that ABA in blueberries increases the wax concentration and changes the composition towards triterpenes, which limit transpiration through the cuticle. So I think that's awfully cool. And actually, we just for fun, we left some berries out on the counter and just took weights after a few days, and we saw that effect too. The berries sprayed with ABA they lost less water. So not any kind of official experiment, but we just thought it would be fun to test that. So I would argue that an additional use for ABA in the future could be to improve shelf life,
Right.
although I think there's probably some more research needed on that. So
Great, thank you.
yeah. Okay, I think that's it.
Bodie Panisi with the University of Georgia to talk about blueberries and biostimulants.
Good afternoon. You may notice, but I'm not Musi Haptaselassie, who was supposed to be the speaker and presenter, but I work with him, and I had the, I don't know if this was smart, but I told him, I know you're sick, and I'm going to the conference anyway. I think I can handle your talk. So we'll see if I can. But if I cannot, then please make sure you tell him that. All right. So this talk is about the impact of biostimulants on blueberry growth and soil biological health done in a greenhouse. I happen to work with both Rachel and Camilla and Musi again, and I have looked at some of the work that they have done with this, and also I have helped them put some of the microbial biostimulants in the field. So today we're only presenting the greenhouse work, and the work from the field is coming up, and hopefully by the end of this year we'll have the results wrapped up. So just to give you a little bit of background and just very quickly to introduce some concepts that are really important and pertinent to the work is what are biostimulants? And there is an official term, and there are many, many different terminologies that are being used. And so the best one that we found was the one that is listed here, any substance or microorganism that has been applied to the plants with the aim to enhance nutrition, efficiency, abiotic stress tolerance, and or crop quality traits, regardless of what the content is, whether it's nutrients or something else like an active ingredient or a microorganism. And this is something that even I, on the ornamental side, I work with flowers. I have seen in the last 10 years how more and more consumers are asking their landscapers and growers of the ornamental plants in greenhouses and nurseries are also seeing this increase in interest. And so this is certainly something that is coming from all directions. Anyone who is growing plants, whether these are edible or inedible plants, are seeing this interest. So this is what prompted this research, and this was funded by SARE. And certainly yielded some interesting results. Clearly, there is quite a bit of information that is coming from both the industry side and also from research from academia as far as what is the effectiveness of some of these products out on the market. So I'm just showing you several photos here with some information that shows clearly that for the most part, we're seeing quite evident and visible, dramatic, if you will, changes between control plants and treated plants. And it's regardless of what kind of microbial product was used or what kind of biostimulant it was used, we definitely see marked increases. And each one of these products here, and some of those were used in the project, you could see how they're doing something either to boost the development of roots, so you can have bigger root system from there. The hope is that the top is going to benefit from the roots being encouraged to grow and feed into more of the space in the soil system, in the soil. Whether you have something like ABA and hormones that are going to encourage the roots and the shoots to grow better in the system. But you could see how in each of these crops, you could definitely notice that the untreated plant is smaller both in root and shoot mass. And this is in strawberry, watermelon, cucumber, whatever the stage is. This is clearly early stage, but even in some of the later stages, you could see claims and some data to show that this clearly is helping. And again, depending on the crop, you could see some variation about how efficient they were and what system they worked on. The other side of this is when you're using biostimulants, you are hoping to reduce the amount of chemical pesticides that are being used in the system. And that is something that we're very interested as far as soil health is concerned. Soil health is being increasingly seen as one of the most important elements of the production system. And the soil is quite important as far as what is it giving back to us over long term. And we're just beginning to understand the importance of the biological components of the soil and what they do in order to bring in these the structural components together and what to deliver to the root system of the plant, and then from there to the crop. So clearly we're looking at biological parameters, chemical parameters, and physical parameters when we're looking to evaluate whether or not the biostimulants are augmenting or doing, or how are they affecting the soil health. So in order to look at that and assess it, we look at soil respiration, and that's a measure of the activity of certain organisms that are present in the soil. We're looking at their enzymatic activity, so what kind of enzymes are being released. So more microbes you have, the more active the soil is, and the more you're going to be able to tell whether you're counting them, whether or not you're looking at something like their activities in the soil, like some of the enzymes they released. So clearly, lots to look at. And so this project involved applying biostimulants to young blueberry plants in a greenhouse setting, as I said, and looking at two sides. One is the plant growth, and the other is the soil biological health. So how it was done, it was conducted in 2020 in a greenhouse at the UGA Griffin campus, where also I happen to be located. The soil was pretty standard, 75% pine bark and sand, 25%. Plant age was about 17 to 18 months. Plants were chilled before they were put in the experiment, and if the leaves were not dropped by the end of this chill period, they were defoliated so that they can all start at the same stage. The application rate, of course, was according to label, and this is a list of the treatments that were used in this research. So you could take a look at the various types of active ingredients, and for the most part, this is all we care about, is to look at what the active ingredient is. And so hopefully that will give us an indication of what exactly is it doing, or what could be attributed to whatever result we end up getting. So in first, fertiactyl was seaweed and humic acid. Humic acids are very important in forming colloids in the soil, and so they are definitely being a big part of what's been attributed as a positive boost to plants that have been treated with biostimulants. And then down the list goes, you could see HumaGrow has quite a few of the nutrients that we apply to the soil, nitrogen in this case, also some micronutrients. Then we get to Inocucore, and you're looking at actual bacteria that are being supplied with this. And then down, protein hydrolysates, microbial inoculants, like this one is not even being disclosed as what kind of it is, or what mixture it is. Then radiate stands out as being the phytohormones, so both IBA and cytokinins. Then moving on to another lactobacillus with soil set, and again TerraGrow with both a mixture of microbial inoculants and humic acid. So this is what we used, and those were the three treatments that were used. There were four blueberry cultivars, 2 were rabbit-eye and 2 were southern highbush. Again, the 8 biostimulants and the check, 5 replications, and they were in a completely randomized block design. And this is a series of pictures from the greenhouse. So this is what the plant looked like in 2019 when it was first set, moving into May through July. So those were, I told them they were like COVID babies. They definitely had all of it during that time. It was a pretty challenging time for us. What we did was height and width, so typical standard, looking at how the plants grew by measuring their growth, height, width, plant volume, cane diameter and number of canes, leaf pigment contents, and they were taken by, I'll show you a picture later on, with some non-destructive equipment. Beginning and end measurements, so destructive sampling to obtain data on leaf weight and plant weight as well. And in the end, we also looked at all the leaves of the plant. So Rachel likes to take lots and lots of data, and I really appreciate when you end up with lots of data, because you can look at a lot of things and you can draw lots of conclusions. But it's a mess for a graduate student who is stuck in the greenhouse taking it all. So leaf pigment content, they were taken monthly. January through July, and like you can see here, all of these are ways that scientists can gauge whether or not the plant is receiving enough nitrogen, so that's the chlorophyll. Then looking at anthocyanins, flavonols, and something called NBI, or nitrogen balance index. And when I say NBI, you'll know that I'm talking about nitrogen balance index. And each one of these is telling us something different about the plant, but it is all indicative of how healthy the plants are. So we also looked at the destructive sampling that was in December and August. Again, I just mentioned that already. Here is Camilla, who is taking all the data measurement. This is the equipment that is measuring the chlorophyll, anthocyanins, flavonols, and NBI are all in there. And one kind of, everything is very, very easy to move, and you can use that in the field as well. All right, so when we look at the soil biological health, so how do we assess all of that activity that we're hoping to generate with the biostimulants we're using? Well, again, I mentioned soil respiration is the first. So we take the soil, we put it in a special chamber, and after 24 hours, we're taking it out, and then we're measuring how much carbon dioxide has been released, and we do a little calculation, and we figure out which soil increased carbon dioxide more, that is released carbon dioxide, and which one did less. Then there is another test on phosphatase activity. Phosphatase is an enzyme in the soil that converts certain forms of phosphorus into other more utilizable sorts of phosphorus. So the more phosphatase you have, the more active the soil is. Then we're looking at something that is clearly easy to see, yay or nay, with the color of this dye. So it's fluorescein diacetate, or shortly termed FDA. And that is another indicator of the enzymatic activity. The more color you see, the more active the soil is. And finally, another kind of enzyme activity we're looking at is urease, and that is the enzyme that is responsible for converting urea form of nitrogen to a nitrate form of nitrogen. So it's immediately utilizable by the plants. And then the soil biological health, the final indicator, is actually counting the kind and the number of bacteria, so abundance and diversity of the kind of bacteria that exist in the soil that are responsible for certain biological and physical characters. So ammonia oxidizing archaea, which is an organism that evolved before bacteria evolved, but we just name it AOA for short. Ammonia oxidizing bacteria is another one that is, again, judging by the name, oxidizes ammonia and makes it more available to the plant roots. So these, when they're more diverse and they're more abundant, that is an indicator of a healthy soil. So the more, the better. So the results, they flash out to you and you're like, wow, do we even need to listen anymore? Well, it's really a complicated story when you're looking at so much data and you're trying to figure out what happened for which biostimulant, for which cultivar, and which time. So I'll show you some more data, but the bottom line that we found as far as the plants were concerned is that there were no significant differences among all the treatments and the interaction between the cultivar and time. In other words, it didn't matter when that cultivar was treated as it was growing between January and August. So neither in height, width, volume, cane number, diameter, dry mass, leaf area, and then neither one of those activities, including urease, phosphatase, and the soil respiration. So both on the plant side and on the soil side, as far as those parameters were concerned, we did not see any significant differences. And here are some of the tables, and I know that there are lots and lots of data in here. They were taken, again, by month, and you could see that we're presenting in one. Next slide is going to show you the other two cultivars, so Brightwell, Farthing, and the other two are on the next slide. The treatments are listed here, the months, And what we need to show is to look at this control, because anything you look and you have to compare it with the control and say, did it really make any difference? And if it did, it's going to have a number that is hopefully going to be different than the control. So that's what the A and B stand for. B is different than A, but it's not different than A and B together. How different are they? Are they going up? Are they going down? So this is what it tells you here, is that on this date in January for Brightwell, there were no cultivars and no treatments that affected Brightwell in any shape and form, because they were all having the same number and they were all in the control. So they may differ between each other, like the quantum differed from Fertilization and Humagrow, but they were not different from the control. And so the same kind of thing was happening with most of anything that we saw. And so if I go fast through it, it's because there's lots of data that is showing inconsistent, and not like 1 month you're always going to have up trend in chlorophyll in one cultivar, and in another one it's going to be down. So it's up and down, and it was quite challenging for us to make sense out of these numbers. As far as trends, to determine trends. So most of it was not really overwhelming. Like on this date, if we're looking at the chlorophyll here for Legacy and Premier, and you could see that for May, this number is higher than Fertilization, and it's very different. It's lower, it's significantly lower. So for this particular cultivar on that date and this month, that was a positive effect, or excuse me, a negative effect, if you want to call it that, of Fertilization. But then that doesn't mean that it stayed like that, or that it showed any different trend or higher or lower trend another time. So up and down for all the biostimulants. Similar trends in the anthocyanins. Again, there's not much going on here as far as like significance. I mean, look at this, it's all AAA or AB. It's really not all that dramatic changes. Same thing for anthocyanins, flavonols, all the cultivars, NBI. Again, the NBI index is one that it shows us what the status of the nitrogen in the plant is. For Brightwell here, it's the same as the control in February and different than TerraGrow, higher in TerraGrow in February. But by the time it gets to July, you really can't tell any difference. It's all A. Same thing here. So this is a summary. Not many significant differences compared to control, nothing to really make just general large statements. For chlorophyll, which is again an indicator of the capacity of the plant to make more carbohydrates and grow well and put into fruit. Brightwell in February, TerraGrow was the only one that showed 32% higher chlorophyll than control. Legacy in May under Fertilization, on the other hand, had 40% lower than the control. And we saw those. Anthocyanins, Legacy in June, TerraGrow had higher. So there's another TerraGrow here. You could see TerraGrow keeps higher and higher. So that's one consistent, if you want to call it that, all across from the control. Flavonols, Brightwell in July, Fertilization was lower again than control. For NBI, Brightwell in February, TerraGrow was about 55% higher than control, and for Farthing in June, Humagrow was 41% higher than control. In general, biostimulant effect on the rabbit eye was in the early growth stages. Effect of the same biostimulant was variable during the growth period and between the cultivars. So that's the other complicating thing, is like you want to say, take this that has been really useful and boosts up nitrogen, NBI, chlorophyll and everything, and apply it to all your cultivars. Well, based on this data, we really can't say that. For some cultivars, it seems to do the job. For others, you really can't tell. In March and April, because of the COVID, we did not recognize, but the lights were, just the heating was something happened with the heating in that greenhouse, and the temperature went really up a couple of times, and we weren't even allowed to go back to see it. So by the time Rachel and the graduate student were able to go in, the plants had already been stressed. But smart as she is, she realized that this may be an opportunity to look at the claim that biostimulants help with abiotic stress. And so that was another thing that she looked at, and it appeared that it did not really help for some cultivars. For others, there was a slight help, if you want to call it that. But it was really not a very consistent effect. So looking at the enzyme activity of the microbes, again here, this is a graph with lots of data. The 4 cultivars underneath here, the control is indicated by this red arrow. If you see AB, then you're looking at something that is different, but you're not seeing it. A is the same as AB, even though you could say, well, it's higher. Well, it's higher, but it's not statistically higher. But A and B are different, and those are for inoculcore and for the actal, and nothing significant for the others. So that's for the fluorescent diacetate enzyme assay. This is for ammonia oxidizing archaea. So that was one group of bacteria that are important to oxidize ammonia, and that's for abundance, just a sheer amount of these microbes that are in the field or in the soil. So for Premier, the control again, BC, and you can see anything that is not, and you're looking at TerraGrow that is actually higher, significantly higher. And you can see the large variation that existed in the data, but this one was really nicely kind of clumped up together, so we could see some of those. For AOB abundance, that was the other part of the other group of bacteria that are oxidizing ammonia to nitrate in the soil. So AOB abundance, looking here at control, is B, and anything that is not B, that is not AB, is going to be significantly different. So there is A here, and that's for HumaGrow. And the same thing here in the last one, the Premier cultivar. Control is C, and anything that is A and B is going to be different, and even A and B, but not A, B, and C. That's going to be the same as C. All right, so in conclusions, most of the soil health parameters were not influenced by the treatment application. The biostimulants did not influence the soil properties, and so soil biological health indicators that were used were not impacted. However, with a cultivar Premier, TerraGrow, and when we're looking at the amino-oxidizing bacteria, or archaea, excuse me, they boosted by almost 14%. And for AOB, which was the amino-oxidizing bacteria in farthing, inoculcore had almost 20% higher to control, and Premier had micronutrients about 21.5% higher than control. And something similar occurred with HumaGrow. So what we're summarizing and concluding is that biostimulants indirectly influence the ammonia transformation to nitrate based on the fact that we're seeing higher numbers of these important bacteria groups in the soil tests. So we try to, of course, figure out why, potentially some to explain this. So most of the plant and soil biological health parameters were not influenced, but again, why? Well, we think that soil already contained many of these ingredients and the stimulant, biostimulants, such as the fulvic acid and the humic acids. We also never really know how much of the product is alive after application, and we don't really have a good idea and a good grasp on how those products are being stored and even the application rates. So there is a lot of research to be done. And I did similar work with lantana, which is a plant that most of you who grow ornamentals, and if you don't grow ornamentals, you've seen it around in the field, in the landscapes. Very similar results. In 1 year, it appeared to boost the flowers and growth of the plant. They were not visually bigger, but by the stats that we could see, they were a little bit better. The next year, we had a very rainy season and no benefit of any kind. So the plants suffer all across. And the impact of the bad weather that is really rainy and cold was more important than anything that we could apply to that plant. So that's the last. Okay, so HumaGrow and TerraGrow showed improvement in the MBI index, the bacteriums, the abundance. So they definitely have an effect on the nitrogen status. And again, if we continue doing this work and looking into how it performs in the field, hopefully things are going to be a little bit more clear, and we can come up with way to describe the application rates and do better job with the directions for storage and quantifying the amount of product that we're putting out. So with that, Zach, did I go over? I usually do. I did, didn't I? I did. I know. Thank you so much.
Speaker Gill. Thank you. We're going to move right along into the next speaker. Dr. Glenn Harris with the University of Georgia will be giving us a presentation on the 4 R's of fertilization for blueberries plus cost and availability.
All right, thanks, Zach. I'm not offended by anybody leaving. It's hard to offend me anymore. Been around. It's good to be back here, and I don't get invited to the blueberry section much because I don't work blueberries that much with. I work more with row crops. So I thought I'd give you a little background since I don't know a lot of you in this room. I was born and raised in southern New Jersey. I tell people from the South Jersey. They do grow blueberries there, as you know. I went to Penn State and Michigan State, so it's good to share the stage today with another Michigan Stater that was up here earlier. I do have a farm background. I started in UGA in our Tifton location in March of '94, so I'm a full professor. I'm educational advisor to Georgia Plant Food, which is the fertilizer industry in this state, and also teach an undergrad class. And then the last one's probably the most important. I do plan to retire from UGA August 1st of this year, and hope to stay in Tifton and work in ag doing part-time things. The last 2 years, I've really spent a lot of my time in row crops. And again, I work mostly cotton and peanuts. As you know, fertilizer prices were up. Fortunately, now they have come down, so I'm getting a little break from having to talk about how to deal with high fertilizer prices 2 years in a row. These are what the prices we're looking at now. We tracked them back as far as 2008 at the time was the highest they had gotten, and they came down and bounced around. But now our economists with the University of Georgia, as of December 1st of last year, we're quoting NP and K at 70, 65, and 50. The nitrogen's a little hard to there's different nitrogen materials, so it's hard to get a price. We usually use urea, maybe one of the liquids. Phosphorus and potassium are easier to price out. We usually use MAP or DAP, and then muriate of potash for K. I did a little check-in with one of our local dealers, and I found the prices just a couple of weeks ago or last week were even a little lower, and so they might have come down a little even since December. But he also said they might go back up a little in the spring when we start planting on our row crops. So, but that's the good news. They've come back down and makes things a lot easier overall. The other thing I wanted to point out real quick, again, since I don't work, I work more row crops than blueberries. It's interesting to me. It's really a whole different system, and you got to think differently. Blueberries is a lot higher value crop, so you can afford to do some things differently than we would on cotton or corn. It's a perennial crop. I mean, when you're working with an annual crop, we're soil sampling every year, and we're making sure we're pushing it. We're probably not using a lot of slow release fertilizers because we're going to have that crop out pretty quick, where a perennial crop's wholly different. The whole rabbit eye versus southern high bush, we pretty much fertilize all of our cotton or corn varieties the same, but that's the difference in blueberries. Of course, the whole low pH, we're in row cropping, we're trying to maintain pHs up around 6.5, or blueberries are you're aiming for a low pH, so that's different. The pine bark and soil organic matter has always been interesting to me, and I got to thinking about this, really, there's a lot of emphasis right now on improving organic matter, row crops, et cetera, even in row crop land, the soil organic matter. And, it's overall obviously a good thing, and again, it might be because we can't afford to do it on a larger scale, whereas in blueberries you see those benefits. Strip irrigation and fertigation, or drip irrigation, we don't do that on row crops. Plant tissue sampling, we might do a little on corn and do a little spot checking on things like cotton and peanuts, but blueberries, you know, you're going to do it more often, and a good way to track as you're fertilizing the blueberries over the years. And then timing, you know, we just harvest when we can on row crops, take what we get, whereas blueberries and fruits and vegetables overall, you got a little more differences there, timing for the markets and how you might fertilize things to push them or slow them down or whatever. So I just thought it'd be interesting to point those out. I did talk to this session in 2016. I thought it was only a couple of years ago, and I started looking for this presentation. It was all the way back in 2016. We talked about a fertilization strategy for blueberries. I do them for all the crops. They're all similar as far as we talk about soil sampling and tissue sampling, et cetera. But blueberries, you know, site selection, this adjusting the pH down in a lot of cases, and improving organic matter, incorporate your P and K, nitrogen split applications, and monitor with soil and tissue samples, and then troubleshooting. So I thought it'd be, just was interesting to look back at what we had covered. And if you remember that talk, we actually spent most of the time talking about tissue sampling, looking at levels, where they need to be, and what they mean for the various nutrients in the plant. Site selection, again, you can't get around it. You know, a lot of the blueberries in Georgia are grown on these flatwood soils, deep sands. Technically, they're coastal plain, but they have a seasonably high water table. You know, organic matter, again, is probably not that much higher than in our traditional row crop land, or what we think of as our traditional coastal plain soil, like a Tifton pebbly loam, has some clay underneath it, et cetera. But that can make a big difference too on your fertilization, of course. And then pH, really, we're going to talk about the 4 R's of fertilization, but you can't forget pH. You know, you can't talk, in my opinion, you can't talk about fertilization and proper fertilization and utilization of nutrients without having a good pH. And again, it's different for row crops versus blueberries, because with row crops, we're trying to hit this sweet spot in between about 6 and 6.5, where all the nutrients are readily available, whereas blueberries, you know, you're down around 5.0 or so. So to get to what I'm supposed to be talking about, the 4 R's of fertilization, and I don't know how many in here have heard of this before. Believe it or not, it's been around a long time. The Fertilizer Institute came up with this. I was trying to track it back down, I think as early as 1988. And the 4 R's of fertilization, you see them in the middle of this kind of puzzle pieces there. Their source, rate, timing, and place. And if you're like me, when I first saw this, I said, how do they get 4 R's? It looks like an S, an R, a T, and a P. But as you know, you need the right source and the right rate and the right, you get it, right? Okay. Same, that's how I felt too. Okay. But be honest with you, when I first saw it, I said, oh yeah, that's fine, you know, that makes sense, whatever. But really, the more I thought about it and the more, you know, worked with it, it really does make a lot of sense. If you really want to get the most out of your fertilizer dollar, you know, you really need to follow this and pay attention. I personally think we have a tendency to just to focus on rate. How much do I need? Okay, go down to the store. What do you have? Just put it out now. But again, that's ignoring the other 3 R's when you do it that way. And then, if you look around the outside of that puzzle piece, what do you see? You see economic, environmental, and social. And basically, that's the definition of sustainability. And again, sustainability's been around a long time, but it sure seems to me that it's really picked up steam, ahead of steam, and we're really focused on that. And what's interesting is I have a tendency to think of these 4 R's, getting the most out of my fertilizer dollar, making the best yield and everything. But the beauty of it is it also should be environmentally friendly and should fit really good with sustainable ag. You know, in fact, if you look at it, I think they were a little ahead of their time, because, you know, the 4 R's really lead right into things like sustainability, carbon sequestration. We heard Bodie talk about soil health, carbon credits, regenerative ag, whatever you want to call it. You know, this is a real basis of it when it comes to fertilization. So in that regard, I think TFI was even a little ahead of their time. So To delve into these a little, and I'm probably going to kind of know I'm the last speaker before break, so we're hopefully going to be on time. We'll just talk a little about this, and we're going to have the advantage. I'm not going to get lost in the weeds, because again, I don't work blueberries. But I thought it would be good, to talk about some things and just maybe trigger some thoughts to make you think about on your operation with your blueberries. But when it comes to rate, I put this slide together just to look at some of the comparisons. If you don't know, when we talk about cotton, we're somewhere in the region of 100 pounds of N and probably 50 and 50, depending on where your P and K are, but probably about 50 pounds of each of those. Of course, peanuts, fixed nitrogen, are good scavengers of P and K. So a lot of times they're recommendation 0-0. And then where blueberries fall, roughly, and again, this is just a rough thing, 50 or 60 pounds of nitrogen probably, and 50-50 per year on a blueberry. So they're kind of in between. I work with some crops that really take a lot of fertilizer. If you look at what even 250 bushel corn, when you have medium P and K, you're up around that 300, 120, 190 NP and K. That's a load of fertilizer. We have a technical term for that. That's called a shit ton of fertilizer. They're recording this, but I don't care. They might bleep me out. I don't care. Whatever. But and then you look at hay, 4 cuttings of hay, we're going to put quite a bit of nitrogen on that, and it's a big exporter. So again, blueberries being a perennial crop, not removing a lot, it's a little different story. I did got invited to the vegetable section last year, and I showed this slide, and I got a little laughed at or giggles, I think, because, University of Georgia's kind of known to be a little conservative. Commercially, they're putting a lot more fertilizer, especially nitrogen, probably. But you get the idea. It's bigger rates on these crops. Sources. This is where we could spend a lot of time, and we're not, because I used to tell people there's a million ways to fertilize cotton, and I know if that's the truth, there's a million ways to fertilize blueberries. There's so many different fertilizers out there, ratios, all kinds of things. But I referred back to the old recommendations and University of Georgia recommendations. We go back to some of these complete homogenized blends. I think probably worked with Gerard Crewer a long time. I see him in the audience. Good to see him. But depending on where your P and K are, we'll recommend different rates of 10-10-10 or 12-4-8 or 16-4-8, et cetera. And this is an old slide, because you probably think you might still think of these as IMC Rainbow, et cetera. But if you didn't know, that was generated out of a plant in Americus, Georgia, and they sold, and now it's still working, and now but it's under a new name, a new company by T-Mac Agro. They've come out with this new line of blue. And it's really valuable. I tell you what, we really need these types of fertilizers, in my opinion, because if we just blend, and especially the micronutrients don't put in, we're going to get in trouble down the road with some of these micronutrients. And again, a lot of times you do need a complete fertilizer as a base on things, or in the case of blueberries, it might provide everything you need. So that's that's kind of the basis of the blueberry fertilization. But you have other things, nitrogen sources. You might use ammonium sulfate, especially if you want to keep your pH down, having troubles with maybe the calcium carbonate in your waters, bringing your pH up a little, so you want to keep that down. You use ammonium sulfate. The slow release. Again, we don't use slow release a lot in row crops, but especially the way I understand it, the established or the establishing blueberries, the young plants, you don't want to burn them, and slow release could be valuable there, and maybe slow release to a perennial crop makes a lot more sense to me. Organics, that's a whole nother realm. I got the inorganics here on the slide, but the pictures of them, but organics, slow release, there's again a lot of different ones. You got poultry litters, you got others. I opened the guide to the conference here. I saw an ad where one company had 7 different types of organic nitrogen alone in their fertilizer. I think it was maybe cottonseed meal and poultry litter, whatever. And again, these are all good things. They might have a little difference of release on the nitrogen. They have to be broken down by the microbes in the soil and released as ammonium or nitrate. But they definitely have a place. And then the byproducts, I don't know if you're going to use a lot of byproducts on a high-value crop like blueberries, but and I think I took that slide out. I've spent, when fertilizer prices went up the last 2 years, I spent a lot of my time fielding questions about byproducts. And I think one of the things, there was a lot of industries in particular were looking around going, hey, I've been putting this thing in the landfill, but I think it might have some value, some nutrient value, or some organic matter value, and can I put it out as a fertilizer or soil amendment? So we dealt a lot with that. The good news, as you know, the Department of Ag here in Georgia has regulations for looking at either fertilizers or soil amendments to make sure they're safe, et cetera. But there are a lot of things coming out of pulp and paper mills. They even, there was a pet food company that had some wastewater that was looking into applying that kind of thing. So that's source. Nitrogen source, I don't know exactly what you're using on blueberries, but nitrogen is the interesting one because there's a number of different forms available. The cost can be a little different depending on what they are. And what we have found on cotton is that I tested the number you see here. If you go left to right, you're looking at things like ammonium nitrate, calcium ammonium nitrate, 18, which is a liquid, 28, slow release ESN, et cetera. They all do pretty good when you look at it. Those are pretty good cotton yields we're showing, and not a lot of difference top to bottom. But what's interesting, what trended to the top is the ammonium nitrate based fertilizers. And a lot of people said, well, that's because they don't have urea, they don't volatilize. But actually, we use inhibitors a lot of times on the urea. We really think it was a plant preference. And again, maybe there's some room and researchable topic, as they say, to look at maybe some different nitrogen sources on blueberries to see which ones are the best. I think that might find that interesting. There's your byproduct slide. Chicken litter, we all know. Potash, they're burning chicken litter down to ash. Looking at that, it's mostly a potassium source. Gin trash, that's coming out of agricultural. Biosolids, they've been around a long time. You've probably heard of Milorganite. There was one out of Louisville in the picture. This is a farmer in Appling County, Georgia, and that's Louisville Green. So it's a very similar product coming out of Louisville, Kentucky. Simtrex and Sustera were biosolids-based fertilizers. I found out one of them was coming out of the waste out of Disneyland. So I call that magic shit, actually. So that's really good stuff. You got to stand in line for a couple hours before you're allowed to use it. And, come on, that's got to be good. Anyway, all right. I thought I might get a laugh out of that. And out of industry, like I said, if you didn't know, we're scrubbing the sulfur dioxide out of coal burning plants. We're getting flue gas desulfurized or smokestack gypsum. We're using that on peanuts. Wood ashes, wall boards, there's all kinds of things. So these really need to be dealt on a case-by-case basis, find out what they are. And like I said, I'm not sure if I would have a real fit in blueberry production because of the high value nature of that crop. Placement, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on placement. Probably the biggest thing that's pretty clear in our recommendations out of UGA, I know, is you don't want to pile a lot next to the base of the bush because you're going to burn it. All inorganic fertilizers are salts, so they can burn. So you want to keep that spread out, et cetera. The interesting thing at the bottom, I have foliar. And foliar is a whole nother topic, and it's an interesting one. There are not a lot of controversial things in soil science and what I do, but people get excited about foliar a lot because a lot of people think it never works. And it never works, you can't do that, can't feed it through the leaf. And then you got some people say, oh, you can do everything through the leaf. So what's the answer? As you can guess, it's probably somewhere in between. But you really got to look at the crop, the nutrient, the timing, really the 4 R's you got to look at, even just within foliar. I never thought blueberry was a good candidate for foliar feeding because of the kind of a waxy cuticle, et cetera. But it might be something you want to look at. I think James Jacobs told me they're looking at some foliar calciums, which normally I would tell you doesn't translocate very well, but maybe it's something to look at. And that's a placement issue because you're putting the fertilizer right on the leaf instead of putting it in the ground. And then I'll finish with timing. We split nitrogen on corn and cotton, mostly because we're using fairly large amounts and we want to spread it out and not, we want to have some at the end of the year before it leaches out of the soil. I know you do split, we recommend split applications on both rabbit eye and southern high bush, and it's more of I'm not going to call it spoon feeding, but and there's issues about not getting too much growth on a blueberry, et cetera. But anytime you can split apply nitrogen is probably a good idea. The other thing, you can be more efficient. We have some data on corn that I can make you just as much corn yield on less nitrogen if you split apply it. And that probably has to do, again, with some of the losses. Nitrogen can go volatilize up in the air, it can leach, it can run off. There's a lot of ways it can get away from you. So split applications on nitrogen are really critical. And in an establishment, you might want to split lower amounts again to avoid burning those young plants, et cetera. Corn, we actually put some through the pivot. If you're drip fertigating blueberries, and I think there's a talk coming up here later on about drip fertigating, that sounds interesting to me, and probably can't be more efficient. We do it on corn between, by time the grower can't get in with a tractor up to tassel, they can foliar feed nitrogen corn pretty easily. So I'll leave you with a few other things to think about before I step down. Blueberries, really crops in general, pH is important, needs to be managed for good nutrient uptake. I actually did get some questions sometimes, not from around this area, but others, about, can I get my pH too low? What if I'm down around 3? And that's a good question. Micronutrients are important, but they do have a narrow window of sufficiency, so you got to be careful about how you supply them. You don't want to overdo it. Shop around for best fertilizer prices, but not all fertilizers work the same. We could talk about ammonium versus nitrate base versus urea, et cetera. And then again, I'll finish, but this foliar fertilizing calcium, usually not effective on other crops, may be something to look at on blueberry. So with that, I'll finish and see if you have any questions. I need a chauffeur in the back is what I need, so if you get the hard questions, give them to Zach. Zach said he'll take them. Any questions? All right.
Looks like we're doing good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to step out of the way, and Penelope Perkins, VC. Did I say that right? Yeah. Good. From North Carolina State University is going to how rabbit eye blueberries compare to southern high bush.
You got it. Good morning. I'd like to, afternoon really. Thank you all for sticking around. I'd like to thank everybody, the organizing committee, for inviting me. I had the unenviable job of comparing rabbit eye to southern high bush, and I'm going to hopefully give both sides of the coin. So first I want to kind of back up a little bit and explain what I like about blueberries compared to brambles, which I work a lot on. First of all, they have a peel, which blackberries and raspberries don't have. They're relatively easy to harvest. They don't have thorns. They can be rolled off fruit pedicels pretty easily. And then the flesh is relatively firm compared to other berry crops. They're also less juicy, which makes it a little easier for injury problems. And they are responsive to CA, controlled atmosphere storage. They can last longer by applying larger amounts of CO2. So the other nice thing about blueberries, which is kind of unique, in the health world, they have a very unusual complex of anthocyanin pigments. They have 5 out of the 6 major pigments, and they have a whole pile of different sugars attached to them, which do different things in your body. They're also high in chlorogenic acid, which most people associate with coffee. There's a lot of interest in this now because it's been found to be a pretty interesting and effective way for anti-inflammatories, antioxidant, and also for blood glucose metabolism. So what's a negative? Well, at least in the South, they're often ripe when the weather is really warm. So that means in order to get these to have any kind of shelf life at all, you have to remove that field heat. The respiration rate is also moderately high, and the ethylene is all over the board. At one time, they were classified as a very low ethylene. some newer research that was put in a thesis in 2020 indicates they're more in the moderate level like a tomato. The other problem with blueberries, they don't have a rind. So even though they have a cuticle, they don't have something like a honeydew melon or a cantaloupe would have to really protect them from harvest. And then also the other big change that's come that affects a lot of post-harvest issues is that we're going from hand harvest to a must-do machine harvest system because we lack the labor. A little bit about respiration and ethylene. There was some interesting work presented by an earlier speaker about ABA, which I think probably answers a lot of questions I had when I was going through literature last night. So the CO2 production increases transiently prior to full ripeness, which makes this technically a climacteric respiring crop, but it's never behaved like one, as was indicated earlier. And the ethylene is all over the place, and it's variety by variety. But actually, these guys are parallel. If you look at respiration, you look at ethylene, they're parallel to a tomato, which is like the classic crop that's used for all these experiments. But it doesn't matter in the long run. When it comes to blueberry, the most important thing by far is to get these blueberries out of the field in good shape and keep them cold. The colder they are, the longer they will last. That's the number one thing for post-harvest in blueberries. So what happens if I look at southern highbush, specifically among the blueberries? I'm not going to mention northern highbush at this point. But southern highbush has a lot of species in the background. They have darrow-eye, they have a whole pile of native, as well as cornbosum or northern highbush. But they also tend to be more finicky to establish and to grow, especially getting them started. They also have this lovely thing where they tend to fruit earlier in the summer. So that means you have a little less temperature going on in the field. And also, as Florida knows, you can generate very high prices when you have the first fruit of the year. And the newer cultivars are much better in quality than the old southern highbush. The other huge advantage that southern highbush has is they have active breeding programs, large breeding programs at several points across the United States. Now, looking at poor old rabbit-eye, which virgatum is or Ashii was the old name, it's now Vaccinium virgatum. It's more adapted to mineral soils. I always liked rabbit-eye because it would live when nothing else would. More drought resistant, more susceptible to cold damage of the plants and also of the blooms. It can out-yield southern highbush. And the fruit, in my opinion, we've looked at rabbit-eye off and on over the years, but in my opinion, they're just as robust in storage as southern highbush. And again, it's cultivar by cultivar. There's more anthocyanin pigment. The big negative, they ripen later than southern highbush, as much as a month. Well, that's a huge difference. If you're in North Carolina or Georgia, June versus July, you know what happens to the temperatures, you know what happens to the humidity. And these are huge issues to deal with from a fruit quality standpoint. And then the other problem that's always existed over rabbit eyes, and they've gotten a bad rap over the years, their fruit quality is considered less than desirable. And I'll go into a little bit of detail on what we found on this. And then the other problem has been there haven't been these large programs on rabbit eye. Scott Neesmith probably had the most rabbit eye releases in years. And then it's been a while. We looked at several of those of the last couple of years up in North Carolina. Now, the shelf life, again, can be just as long as the southern highbush. So we're looking, the actual advertised shelf life for blueberries is 2 weeks. Well, we all know southern highbush can go 4. We know northern highbush can go 4. Rabbit eye can go 4. They can probably go 6. We have some data that we've done in our lab that shows that they can last 6 weeks. They can probably go 8, especially if you start applying a little CA to them. And the reason I have this container ship next to this is, number one, this was taken out the river 2 years ago. And it's to demonstrate that if you're going to move these to any distance at all to a Pacific Rim, they have to last at least 8 weeks. The other thing about the rabbit eye, their anthocyanin can be 50% higher than in a southern highbush. And chlorogenic acid can be 100% higher, depending, again, on the cultivar. But the challenges, it's all about the season. They ripen later, and in the deep south, that means it's going to be hot and it's going to be humid. So you have more chances of disease and keeping up with that disease. You have more chances of botrytis getting a hold. and you have to have a whole lot more cooling to get rid of the field heat. On top of all this, since they do produce ethylene, ethylene's hanging around, and we are not really sure exactly what it's doing in the fruit. We know it's not really promoting color development after harvest, but it might be doing something with some of the softening enzymes. Another bad news kind of scenario. And again, this goes back to if you can keep it cool, then you slow down your enzyme activity. The other problem is the fruit characteristics for sensory. Consumers have complaints about rabbit eye. It's translated back into price point differentials for the grower. So I'm going to segue a little bit into this. It's pretty well established now in the blueberry world. And I kind of like looking at this. To me, it's almost like looking at apples. They like them sweet, not sour. Firm, not mealy. Those things sound like apple attributes in many ways. And then the number 3 one is blueberry flavor. And I've always wondered what that was, but I'm beginning to understand a little bit more, especially after we know a little bit more about the terpenes, rather. Now the problem is, in a lab situation, you got a breeding program, you got, say, 200 samples at advanced selections you have to evaluate. You can do sweetness and sourness pretty easily in the lab, but you can't do firmness and flavor easily. So what are you to do? And that, we're not even going to talk about sensory, where you can maybe do 4. Okay, so first question that comes up, that rabbit eye are perceived as being less sweet and more sour. Well, when I looked at data from a couple years of when we collected rabbit eyes in southern high bush and a planting up in North Carolina, yes, the rabbit eyes were about 1% lower in sugars, and they were a little bit higher in titratable acidity. The key here, though, let's see. Should never try laser pointing. There we go. Okay, so the key here is, if you look at your sugars, soluble solids is like a range of everything, but the total sugars here is not very different. So you got 745 versus 720. That's not significantly different. So that means there's the same amount of sugar on these, essentially in the same, these 2 types of genotypes. Titratable acidity here, 0.35, 0.44. In my opinion, I want a titratable acidity somewhere between 0.2 and 0.7, and these both fall within that range. If you get below 0.2, in my opinion, a blueberry is bland, and if you get above 1, blueberries can be quite sour tasting. We also looked at organic acid composition. Well, this is what's weird about rabbit eyes, and we're still scratching our heads trying to figure out why. Okay, citric acid, we all know what citric acid is. It's the most common acid in fruits, and it gives a sour taste. Well, it's quite high in southern high bush. It's 73% of organic acids, but it's only 30% in rabbit eye. In rabbit eye, it flips. And quinic acid, which is an organic acid with a phenolic attached to it, is unusually high in rabbit eye, consistently. But we don't know why. We can't figure out a physiological reason as to why that is. And then malic acid is it lingers around, but it's not a high player in everything. So when you look at blueberry fruit quality, it's mostly going to be citric acid that you're thinking about for the sourness and also the total sugars. So on the paper or in the lab, these values don't look that different. The other thing that we looked at here, the other complaint is about firmness in rabbit eye. And what I want to demonstrate here is it's about the cultivar again. Titan is a rabbit eye. It's huge, right? This is like your 10-gram berry. This is the one everybody wants. I love this berry. But its firmness is just as high as the southern high bush next to it, Indigo Crisp, which is a crisp variety. But then, wherever those asterisks are, those are rabbit eyes. Well, you see, and this is puncture force, by the way, as you see that they all range down, just like southern high bush next to them. They're all over the board. And you can see a great big demarcation between over 1 Newton of firmness, which is pretty crisp, down to about a ½ Newton, which now getting into the soft end. I didn't put all 60 on here. So this is another one of those issues where you label a genotype based on the cultivars that were sampled. Quickly go over this. We use puncture force a lot because it's easy to do. My PhD student has been working on something new, comparing puncture versus Young's modulus. Young's modulus is a formula that's generated. Here's puncture at the very top here. Young's modulus comes well before puncture. This is the key thing. It's a little bit of the slope that goes up just before puncture. But what I like to think of it is, it's like as soon as that probe touches the blueberry, it's sensing what's going on. And when you look at Young's modulus, 20% burst strain. To us, that's been a very important step forward, because we're finding better correlations with Young's modulus 20% than we are with puncture for certain things. I bring this up here where we're looking at, again, this is going back to rabbit eye versus southern high bush. We were looking at bruising. We dropped the berries to bruise them, and then we looked at what's the correlation that we have with our texture analyzer with Young's modulus. That one's the one that turned out to be the most related. Number one, it wasn't the best relationship. It was still a correlation of only 0.4. I would like to see something like 0.7. But the most important question here is, if we're doing machine harvesting and sorting, what are we worried about for bruising? And again, your bruise ratio, the lower the number, the less bruising it gets. What we found when we used this application software was that we had no problem separating the soft ones. They're very clear. And what do we have in the soft ones? Several of the rabbit eyes, probably more rabbit eyes than southern high bush. And on the low end, we tend to have a surprise. In Georgia, southern high bush, like Ripple, is looking really good. But generally, the ones on the low end for bruising ratio are southern high bush. So our next PhD student question was, what are the components of blueberry texture? And of course, he came up with a long list. I'm just giving you the short list here, based on what we were finding in the literature as well. So when you look at a blueberry, you're looking at the peel first. The elasticity of the peel. How much give does it have when you're trying to apply a puncture force, if you bounce it on something? The pulp. What we were finding, my postdoc that was doing work on the blueberry cell wall work, the pulp was very different from the peel. And then the pulp, I think the turgor is the key. If it's turgor versus mealy, those are the two things that happen a lot in the pulp. And then there are some other things that have been brought up over the years, like stone cells that are present in the pulp, and also seeds that could have a role in the texture of that. And then overall, on top of the individual parts of a berry, you're looking at also resistance of the peel and the pulp as a whole to puncture, or whatever else test you're using. But I think the key thing that the PhD student has now found after 3 years of looking at this, the most important takeaways, if you're doing this kind of work in the lab, is that using a needle probe or the same 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter diameter we've all used is very good for separating cultivars for firmness. But if you're looking for storage, use compression. This is a much bigger probe. It's down here on the lower edge. This is a much wider probe, but it was better at singulating storage from not stored in firmness. So back to what's going on with quality of rabbit eyes. So poor Heduk, his last study, I think he'd like to graduate someday. But really, what he was doing this summer was looking at 40 cultivars. Most of these were southern high bush. There were 7 rabbit eyes. What's the sensory on these? And yes, we've seen a lot of sensory studies. This was specifically only for texture. And the idea has always been, food scientists and horticulturists debate this all the time. Food scientists say you can't measure texture and make a conclusion because texture is not mouthfeel. Our answer is we can't screen 200 varieties of blueberries. We need something practical. So the idea was, can we identify parameters from a descriptive panel that will mimic what we're seeing on a texture analyzer? And what he was doing was worked with Sensory Spectrum, which is really the people who developed a lot of the sensory data over the years. They happened to have a location in Kannapolis, so it worked out beautifully. And they developed descriptors, and they use a number of what they call standards to develop those and taste these over time. So we came up with a set of 4 that were highly correlated with texture. And these were Snap Crisp, which is turgor. No big surprise when you start looking at the literature and realize that turgor is really well associated both with quality and shelf life in blueberry. Residual skin, that's what's left when you chew a blueberry. That's what the bits that are left. The amount of particles that are not skin, AKA seeds, whereas one of the thoughts that might be what these were, although we didn't identify them, and mealiness. Okay, we've heard these before about rabbit eye. All right, what happened? Not so good. So, over here, this is a kind of a PCA grouping here. All those blue dots are southern highbush and northern highbush. Those green dots are rabbit eye. We didn't have very many. But the important thing is here, if you look to the right of the screen, the green ones are associating together. That's not a good thing, okay? They're on the negative side. And really what was happening is if you look at all of these arrows here, these show the amount of significance that the arrows had in the descriptive test. Amount of particles and mealiness are to the far right, where your rabbit eyes are. And then over the snap crisp, hardness, springiness are over on the left, where your southern highbush are, and northern highbush. And then there are a couple like in the middle, like Prince, as a rabbit eye that looks pretty good. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, I've eaten Titan, and I've loved Titan, and I would never say it was mealy, and I wouldn't say it had particle residue. I wouldn't say it was gritty. Well, what we did here, because of the way the panelists were set up, we had to hold our fruit for a week at low temperature. So they had 7 days sitting in the cooler, and I think that maybe for rabbit eyes, that's enough to start whatever is going on in the mealiness category, or maybe also weight loss, although weight loss, we never found significance. But something's going on here, and I don't necessarily think it's related to good or bad. I think it might have to go deeper than that, and it's something about something in rabbit eyes is activated quickly. So, how do we keep our blueberry consumers happy? We want to prevent weight loss and slow respiration. Turgor and water content have been hammered on over and over and over in the last 5 years in the literature. We are convinced that when you lose weight loss in a blueberry, when you lose water content, it's triggering senescence. Why? Well, that's not for me to figure out, that's for sure. But that's still being looked at in a million ways all across the globe. The other thing is, what is causing these residual skin and hard particles? Why are they appearing? And why is it specific more to rabbit eye, for instance? Is it lignification? Or is the peel less adhered? Is it like some of the apples, where the old apples, you know, they're like a Macintosh, which I love, the peel tends to come apart as they sit around. Or is there pulp softening going on? Again, lots of data for the next person to research. But overall, you know, the quick and dirty things, the good news is rabbit eyes are, in my opinion, much easier to get established and maintain than southern highbush. And certainly I don't think the overall shelf life is any different. If you were to look at these and look at decay, you wouldn't see necessarily a significant difference. As long as you're careful about your cooling. And you have to remember, you're going to need more cooling inputs for the rabbit eye if it's ripening later in the summer when you have more heat load. I think the key here is you're going to increase, you have to be very, very careful maybe in your cooler to make sure you think about your relative humidity and your vapor pressure deficit. And I know Angelos is going to talk more about this tomorrow. And then the other thing I think about rabbit eye fruit, looking forward, rabbit eye have more scope for increasing phytochemicals, I think, than southern highbush, because they're made a little bit differently. So what do we do about rabbit eye? If you already have old established plantings, make sure you focus on your pre-harvest maintenance. Make sure the plants are healthy. And make sure you have disease control. And remember, again, they're producing in a hot season. And then, of course, all of the cooling steps that I'm sure Angelos will talk about a little bit more tomorrow. But to me, it's like, what's causing these mouth issues with rabbit eye? Like a number of possibilities. Could be ethylene now, maybe it's ABA as well. Cell wall enzymes, cell structure. Maybe something further upstream we haven't even thought about yet. And maybe looking at the molecular aspects of this will help tease it out. But overall, long term, and this is kind of a kudos for the breeder who'll be talking tomorrow, we need to do more selection of germplasm with rabbit eyes. especially focusing on adaptability to mechanical harvest. They have to be able to stand up to those impacts that they're going to get in the field, resistance to bruising especially, and also ability to stay firm in storage. Keep them firm in storage, you probably won't have the mouthfeel issues that have been going on with some of the older cultivars. Just a quick shot of my lab. This is the building I work in, so really nice up there if you ever have a chance to go to Kannapolis. And here's my other pet peeve about rabbit eyes. Can we name them something different? I mean, it's Vaccinium virgatum. Could we call them virgatum berries? I don't know. But virgatum, by the way, means twiggy, so that doesn't help much. But just an idea to throw out there, because one of the perceptions is people are thinking it's truly a rabbit's eye that they're eating. So truly, maybe time to rebrand a rabbit eye. And I think that's it. Any questions, if we have time?
Do you find that any of these mealy issues or mouthfeel issues or just some of the general negative detractors from it can be variety sensitive? I don't actually know my variety spread, but I have a half dozen varieties of rabbit eyes that I have a couple of on the farm, and I do find there to be a different texture component among them. So I don't know if there's anything, both on the breeding perspective and just in general.
I think, if I understand your question right, it's about cultivar differences and mealiness or variety differences?
Yes. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, there are very, very, very strong differences in mealiness. Some of the really old varieties like powder blue and tiff blue are known to be quite mealy. And the newer varieties, I think, are less so. But then again, I've been around for a long time, so I'm familiar with them. And some of the more recent hires don't understand the difference. But to me, yes, there's a gradual increase in less mealy with some of the newer cultivars that released. But when we're talking newer cultivars, we're talking at least 20 years ago. So we have probably a big leap to take in getting some better material out there in rabbit eye in general. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
We're going to keep this train rolling with David Brilla from the USDA ARS to talk to us about good reasons for using fertigation and short irrigation cycles.
Good afternoon. For those who don't know me, I'm a research horticulturist with the USDA Ag Research Service in Corvallis, Oregon. So I work on fruit crops, including northern highbush blueberry. And so this afternoon, I'm going to talk a little bit about the irrigation work that we've been doing over the years. I also mentioned using fertigation. I apologize. When I put my slides together, I figured there's no way I was going to cover both topics within 20 minutes. I'll just say fertigation, it's a good thing with nitrogen. Other nutrients, you could apply by fertigation or granular. It doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. So that's the summary of my fertigation work in 10 seconds. So the problem that I'm going to try to address here is that many blueberry growers are using long irrigation cycles in the Pacific Northwest, particularly up in British Columbia. Potentially that's due to lack of timers to turn their systems on and off automatically, or an automatic link to soil sensors. So this can lead to a number of issues. One is it can lead to plant water stress between irrigation, and we all know that blueberries are very sensitive to water stress. It can lead to deep percolation of nitrate and other nutrients below the root zone, so it washes them out where the roots can reach them. It can lead to phytophthora root rot in certain blueberry cultivars, particularly if you're growing them in heavier soils. It can reduce yields and lead to poorer fruit quality, and it can also result in more heat damage. If you irrigate less frequently, you may have water stress, which then, if you have a high temperature event, a heat event, that you could have more heat damage. So, key to frequency of water applications, well, it's going to depend on your irrigation system. So whether you're using a drip or sprinklers, most blueberry growers these days use drip, although when I started 20 years ago, 90% of our industry was using sprinklers at that time. Root development, how deep your roots go, is going to affect how frequently you need to irrigate. The type of soil that you have, obviously you're going to need to irrigate more frequently in a sandy soil than in a clay soil, and the rate at which the plants are using water. If it's a hot, sunny day, they're going to use water a lot faster, of course, than on a cooler day. So your irrigation system is going to depend on how it's designed. It's how far the emitters are apart, what the flow rate are on those emitters, what your row spacing is, the operating pressure. Typical system, it takes about 2.5 to 5 hours to apply about 0.2 acre inches of water. And it's really important to keep an eye on how much water you're applying. And one of the best ways to do that, and a relatively inexpensive way to do that, is to install a water meter in your system so that you can calculate how much water you're actually applying. Don't rely on the design of the system, because you'll find that what the design is really doesn't necessarily measure up with how much water you're actually applying. Root development in blueberries, we've done some work in the past, and we've demonstrated, and I think you all know this, that blueberry is a very shallow rooted crop. Most of the roots are going to be in the top foot of soil or so, and concentrated somewhere between 4 and 6 inches deep. So it's a very shallow rooted crop. So it doesn't have a lot of soil to explore when it's extracting this water. And if you're irrigating with drip, your root system is going to be even further restricted to wherever those emitters. I mean, the roots are going to develop where the water is, so they're going to develop around that root system. So typically in a 3 by 10 foot plant spacing, we figure that about 20% of the soil volume is actually wet by the drip emitters, depending on your soil type. And then soil texture, obviously, sandy soils are going to hold a lot less water than a heavier soil. But let's take example, a loam soil. It's going to hold approximately 1 acre inches of water per foot of soil depth. But that doesn't mean that's how much available to the plants. So typically, if you let it go drier than 20 to 30% of that water, the blueberry plant will start to experience stress. So in reality, you only have in a loam about 0.36 to 0.54 acre inches of water per foot of soil. So it's a lot less than that total amount. So when you're determining irrigation frequency, one thing you could do to figure out how frequently you need to irrigate is to use this relatively simpler formula where you multiply your rooting depth by the fraction of soil volume that's wet by your irrigation system, by the water holding capacity of your soil, by the manageable allowable depletion of your soil. So that gives you the maximum ET, or crop water use, between irrigation. So for example, in a loam soil, in a mature blueberry plant, we figure the roots are about 1.25 foot deep. Multiply that by that 0.2, that 20% of that fraction of the soil volume that's being wet. You have a loam soil, you're holding 1.8 inches of water per foot of soil. But with the manageable allowable depletion of about 25%, that comes out to about 0.11 acre inches of water. So that means every time your plants use 0.11 acre inches of water, you need to irrigate, otherwise they're going to start experiencing water stress between those irrigation cycles. So, for example, in Corvallis, Oregon, where I work, we've done some calculation how much water the plants are using. Obviously, our highest water use is going to occur at the hottest time of the year, which for us is July, which is about 0.17, but the maximum demand is about 0.23. So on a loam soil, we're going to need to irrigate twice a day in order to get enough water on with our drip system. So what we started to look at was the possibility of even irrigating more frequently, using what's called pulse drip irrigation. So what pulse drip irrigation is, rather than applying, let's say you have to apply 4 hours of water on a given day, rather than putting that water on all at once in a 4-hour period, you break it up into shorter intervals over the course of the day. So you might do 30 minutes on and then off for an hour, then 30 minutes on, until the total amount of water that you need is applied during that day. There's been results shown in other crops, including in raspberries, if you saw my talk this morning, that some potential benefits of using pulsing is more yield and better fruit quality, higher water use efficiency, obviously, because you're not deep percolating that water, reduced use of chemicals and fertilizers, and there was even one study that showed that you get less emitter plugging with pulsing than you do with standard irrigation. And typically what happens when you use pulse drip, in this particular study, they looked at the relationship of the soil moisture at different depths after irrigation. On top is their control, where they just applied it all at once. At the bottom is where they pulsed it. And basically what you could see here is that water tends to stay higher up in the soil profile, and in this case move laterally in the soil, which sometimes will happen in certain soil types. There was also a study that was done on strawberries a number of years back where they actually shown that you get higher gross revenues when you use pulse drip irrigation. We looked at this in raspberry, and what we found was that basically our yield per acre as we went up through the harvest. So this is each harvest. So with raspberries, we need to harvest every 2 or 3 days over the course of the harvest season, which runs from July to August. And as we got later in the harvest season, we start to see higher yields in our raspberry plants because the berries are larger because we're not getting that water stress in the plants. And in this case, this translated into about 1,100 extra pounds of fruit per acre just simply by pulsing our water applications. And that was equivalent to about $1,000 per acre. So for very little investment in a change in your irrigation system, you can increase your yields. And we show this for multiple years, not just 1 year. And here is just the example of the soil moisture levels at different distances from the drip emitter from 0, 5, and 10 inches. And again, what you can see at 0 and 5 inches from the drip emitter, we're maintaining much higher soil moisture content than we are with the standard irrigation. Consequently, the plants are not becoming water stressed between the irrigation applications. Same thing at the 4 versus 12 inches depth. Again, higher water content underneath the drip emitter, even at the 12-inch depth, which of course in blueberries, as I said, really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But anyways, we want to look at this in blueberries. So we set up a pulse drip study at a site in a field that was established in 2013. So by the time we did the study, it was a mature field. It was an organic field of Draper blueberries. It was a loam soil with a gravelly subsoil. Plants were growing in raised beds. They were mulched with black weed mat. And they had 2 lines of drip tubing per row with 1/4 gallon per hour emitters every 3 feet. So they had a pretty wide emitter spacing in this particular field. So we had 4 treatments that we applied. The first treatment was what the grower was doing. It was basically, it was a fixed schedule that he would use. Basically, every other day they would apply their irrigation, just run it for 12 or 13 hours at a time. The second treatment was that same amount of water, but rather than applying it all at once, we pulsed it in 30-minute intervals every 2 hours. Our third treatment was to schedule the irrigation based on the weather conditions, so calculating ETC and using that to schedule irrigation, and either applying all that water at once, or the fourth treatment where we pulsed that water. So for the grower standard, we irrigate it once every 2 to 4 days for 12 to 13 hours at a time. For our pulse treatment, using the same amount of water that the grower was using, was we irrigate for 30 to 50 minutes every 2 hours, up to 9 times per day. For the weather-based treatment, we were scheduling once every 2 to 4 days, but using the weather conditions to schedule our irrigation. And then with the weather-based scheduling and pulse irrigation, we were using the weather information and pulsing our water applications. So the treatments were applied to 560-foot-long rows and replicated 4 times. So each row was a treatment. And we used, so as you can see, it was pretty simple to do. We just put an automatic control valve on each of our row lines, but you can do that for your entire field and automate your irrigation system in order to pulse it. And this was the increase we got in yield for the first year. And what you can see is that as we went from fixed to pulse, we increased yield. And when we went from fixed versus weather-based scheduling, we increased yield. But more importantly, look at the difference in the prices per acre. We went from $42,000 per acre to $47,000 per acre by simply pulsing it using the same amount of water. And we went all the way up to $57,000 per acre when we used weather-based scheduling and pulsed irrigation. So we increased yield by $15,000 per acre in this organic blueberry field. So it was quite a dramatic increase in terms of the price. So we found that pulsing increased the berry size during the first 2 harvests, while weather-based scheduling tended to increase berry size during the latter harvest. We also found that weather-based scheduling reduced water use during cooler weather, but it actually increased water use during warmer weather, suggesting that basically the grower is over-irrigating when the weather is cool, but under-irrigating when it gets hot because he's just using a fixed schedule. And fruit firmness was very good and similar among all the treatments. So he had nice marketable fruit in each of the treatments. So regardless of how we applied irrigation, that did not seem to affect the firmness of the fruit. So why it worked in this case? Well, one, it was a light, loamy soil. Don't know how well it would actually work in a heavier clay soil. We have done some studies in clay soils to suggest that it's not as effective in such cases. They also had a pretty wide drip emitter spacing. As I mentioned, their emitters were 3 feet apart. Had they had closer emitters, I think they would have gotten better yields with their normal irrigation practices, but I still believe if they used weather-based scheduling and perhaps pulsing, they would have gotten higher yields. And this particular year, this first year of this study was a really hot and dry year. So it was warmer and drier than usual, which would have contributed to more water stress if the plants were not irrigated properly. The second year, we saw some increases with pulsing, and we also saw increases with weather-based scheduling, but in this case, the differences weren't as dramatic. We had less than a $10,000 increase from our worst treatment to our best treatment. But both pulsing and weather-based scheduling did increase berry size in year 2. And once again, weather-based scheduling reduced water use during cooler weather and increased during warmer weather. But it was less effective in the second year because this was an unusually cool year. So you can see that the benefits are going to be greater on a hotter year, of course, than during a cooler year. So our conclusions at this point is that pulse drip irrigation appears to be promising for production in berry crops. The practice maintains higher soil water content than conventional irrigation, that is if you're applying it all at once, which in our case increased growth and yield in both blueberry and raspberry, and in that previous study in strawberry. And growers using this practice on silty, sandy, and gravelly or rocky soils can expect to produce more fruit with less water without any loss in fruit quality. So I'm going to quickly go on to, I just should mention too that additional research is needed to determine whether pulsed irrigation has any benefits on heavier soil types, as well as other blueberry types. I don't know if we'll see the same benefit in rabbit eye, for example. And we also determined that irrigation schedule based on weather-based estimate of crop evapotranspiration increased yield and berry size during both years of the study. So again, scheduling irrigation based on crop ET is important. So I'm just going to quickly go into what is crop evapotranspiration and how do you estimate it. Well, crop evapotranspiration is going to depend on the age of your planting, how big your plants are, the stage of fruit development, of course your weather conditions, and perhaps your weather practices. So one option you can use is to use soil moisture sensors, but that assumes that wherever the soil moisture sensor is representative of your entire field. The other option is to estimate plant water use based on your weather conditions, which is what we try to do. And the way we do this is we have weather stations in the Pacific Northwest that gives us the potential evapotranspiration, the potential for water use depending on what the weather is for that given day. In Georgia, you have the same thing. You have the Georgia Automated Environmental Monitoring Network, which gives you the potential evapotranspiration at a site near you. So you just go onto the internet, go to this site, and you can get this information to get an estimate of what your water requirements are on a given day or a given week. What it basically does, it takes the weather conditions measured with the weather station, so things like solar radiation and air temperature, plugs that into a relatively complicated formula, and then uses that to calculate potential evapotranspiration. Well, potential evapotranspiration is based on a hypothetical grass field, basically a 4-inch tall fescue field is what this is based on. Well, of course, fescue field's not going to use the same amount of water as a blueberry, so you have to multiply then your potential ET by a crop coefficient to calculate what it is for blueberries. So there is a theoretical curve for blueberries that you can use to calculate the crop coefficients that you can use to calculate ETC. And basically what you can see as the crop goes from bud break to the first blue stage, that crop coefficient increases. So basically it's going from 0.25 or 0.3 to about 1.1. What that means is it's going from about 25 to 30% of what a grass field would use at the beginning of the season to more than what the grass field would use by the time the berries are starting to turn blue. And then, of course, as the leaves senesce, that declines. Problem with this is, well, one is this is a theoretical value. There hasn't been any research done, at least not on northern high bush, not very well anyways, at this point. There has been some good work done on southern high bush by Jeff Williamson down at the University of Florida, where he has looked at developing crop coefficients for southern high bush. And there's also what we've learned from studies is that there might be some difference among early, mid, and late season cultivars. Water use in an early season cultivar may not be the same as water use in a late season cultivar. One of the best ways to develop a crop coefficient, like Jeff did, is to use lysimeters. In his case, he used drainage lysimeters. What we're doing is we've built these weighing lysimeters to accurately estimate how much water our blueberry plants are using every minute of every single day. So then what we can do then is we can manipulate that formula to calculate crop coefficients. So basically, we're taking ETC that we're measuring in the field, dividing that by the potential evapotranspiration from the weather station, and developing a series of crop coefficients over the growing season. We've done this in blackberries very successfully. Here's our blackberry field with lysimeters installed. And we were able to develop a crop coefficient over the course of the growing season. We could see the effects of management and so forth on those crop coefficients. So, encouraged by this, we built some lysimeters for blueberries. And basically, you have an inner and outer soil tank. So basically, that inner tank is sitting inside that outer tank in the soil on some sort of weighing system. So here we are installing those lysimeters, and on the right is an installed lysimeter for blueberries. We had a little bit of challenge with the raised beds, but we seem to overcome that pretty well. So our goal here is to measure plant water use hourly and develop crop coefficients for early, mid, and late season cultivars of blueberries. So we planted that field in October 22, so far we've only got 1 year data. When we did this, we followed the standard practices that are used by our industry in Oregon, which is incorporating sawdust into soil prior to shaping the raised beds, 2 lines of drip tubing per row, sawdust mulch over the top. Some growers also use weed mat, grass alleyways between the row, fertigating with nitrogen and other fertilizers as needed. We also apply humic and fulvic acids during establishment to help that root system develop. And we installed an evaporative cooling system, basically micro sprinklers that we can use to prevent heat damage during the summer and perhaps during bloom. This coming year will be the first year that we'll actually be harvesting fruit from this field. But here, anyways, is the data from the first year. So on the top is the weather conditions, and then in D is the crop evapotranspiration. And basically you see that crop ET, or crop water use, increases as the temperature and solar radiation goes up each day. And the bottom graph is the soil water content. The other thing that we're doing is we're measuring soil water content at various depths just to see what the effective rooting depth is. And at this point, what we've found is that most of that water is being taken up from the top 8 inches of the soil profile during that first year after planting. Here is some crop coefficients that we've basically calculated for the warmest month this past year. And I'll just have you focus on the daily average. So crop ET was about 0.07 acre inches per day. Potential evapotranspiration was 0.23. So essentially, if you divide those two, you get 0.32. So essentially, in this young planting, our field was using about 32% of the water that a grass field would use. And that's pretty much what we thought based on canopy cover at that point, how much water they were using. So what we're doing now is developing these crop coefficients for the entire growing season every year, beginning from planting until the plants reach full production. What's next? Of course, we're going to continue to measure crop evapotranspiration, develop crop coefficients for each of these cultivars. We'll continue to monitor root water uptake as well as nutrient leaching because we have the ability to measure drainage and what's in that drainage water. And we're developing procedures using drones or unmanned aerial systems to detect water stress in the plants, using thermal imaging, and to estimate the irrigation water requirements using multispectral images to determine how much cover we have in the field and relating that to water use. So with that, I will stop, and if I have a minute or two for questions, I will take those. Any questions? No. That is not the point. Yeah, I would not install a lysimeter in a grower's field. This is a research instrument. What we're trying to do is develop the crop coefficients that can be incorporated into these agricultural weather station sites so that they have accurate estimates of crop ET. So as a farmer, what you would do is you would go to the site and get that information directly from a weather station near you. The problem is right now, they are doing this, but it's based on theoretical values. What we're trying to do is get actual values for blueberry that will give accurate estimates of water use. Yeah. No, these lysimeters cost about $25,000 each. Yeah, so obviously it's not something, and they're a pain in the neck to manage and a lot of data to collect. So yeah, it's not something a grower would at all find beneficial. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you.
We have Luan Oliveira to give us a precision ag and digital agriculture for specialty crops presentation.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for standing by with me by 5:05. Oh, right now it's like 4:15 p.m. My name is Luan Oliveira. I'm a new assistant professor with the University of Georgia. So I just started my position in August 2023. And since then, I've been trying to find some things to work out on blueberries. As I started late in the season, I don't have any results research, but what I'm going to bring here to you guys is some information about the applications of what is precision agriculture, what is digital agriculture, and the applications of those for specialty crops like blueberries. Every time I want to start a presentation, I start with this video. Here we have I would say 100 years difference in between two technologies. We have Case IH Mogul, it was manufactured in 1910, and we have a Raven Dot planter, which is a completely fully autonomous planter, okay? It gets the seed from the shed, it goes to the field and it plants. And on the other hand, we have that one with a tilling equipment which only tills only one row. And that planter is planting at least 24. And then after that video, I always, you guys are, if you see my next presentation, I'm going to show the same video just to talk about status quo. If those guys, they did not challenge it, the status quo 100 years ago, if they said, no, we have a tractor and we have a plowing or a tilling equipment, we're good, we can do anything now. But that's not right. We have what I call the 7 most dangerous words in agriculture, okay? We have always been doing this way. If those guys did not try to innovate, that Raven 24-row autonomous planter was not going to be a reality today. So, and then I'm a storyteller, so I always tell the history behind that. Agriculture is made by revolutions. And my presentation title, I'm going to go back there so you can see, is how did we get here and where are we going? And people are talking a lot about digital agriculture in these days. And people say, what is that one? So I'm going to explain you. by 8,000 or like 5,000 to 8,000 before Christ, we had the first agricultural revolution. By then we were, oops, I did something here. Oh yeah. By then we were nomads. We were moving to place in order to get our food. But when the first man placed the first seed on the ground, that's where agriculture started, okay? After that, second one, 18th to 19th century, we started using machines. It could be animal mounted or machine mounted, those equipments. So that was the second one. You can even see, where's the laser? Right there. That's the Waterloo Boy, the first John Deere tractor. It was manufactured more or less in 1914. And third agricultural revolution, 1940s, 1960s. Right, the Green Revolution, Norman Burling that released, he got those high-yielding wheat and rice varieties, so genetic modified plants that produced more, and also some chemicals, right? Right after World War II, we had 2,4-D, so that was another revolution in agriculture. And you see, I have this, I say that right now, but the fourth agricultural revolution is happening since, I would say, 2015. Is that we call digital agriculture. Everything is connected. And, but what is the difference in between precision and digital agriculture? Precision agriculture is a strategy management, according to the International Society of Precision Agriculture, okay? It is a tool that helps you to manage the variability of your fields. Digital agriculture is something different. Is the integration of the precision agriculture with the information technologies and communication and the automation engineering. And I'm going to explain you with a better example later on. So precision agriculture, a good example of that is remote sensing, is myself collecting data without touching the plants. And I can do that in several ways, right? The previous presenter, he showed that he's using drones to collect some data for irrigation decisions. And here we have three examples. We have a satellite, we have an airplane, and we have a drone mounted with different sensors, right? Here we have an RGB camera, which is the same camera as your phone, a multispectral camera that can capture what we call wavelengths that our eyes can't see, and hyperspectral, which we have like even more bands, spectral bands than this one, and thermal that captures the heat. But I just said that we can't see things, right? And that's exactly what the drones captures, things that we can't see. If you look at those, what we call wavelengths, our eyes, we can only see between 400 and 700 nanometers, which goes from blue to red. And after that is the infrared, okay? And we use that data because when a plant is stressed or when a plant is healthy, it reflects more or less infrared. So that's why when someone is sick, right, you can tell by the color of the face or something like that. With the plants, it's the same. We use special cameras that can capture this near infrared, and we calculate what people call vegetation indexes. So here I have three examples. An RGB image, which is what our eyes can see. I have a near infrared picture and a red edge. With that, I can do differences. For example, a healthy leaf here reflects a lot of near infrared, but it doesn't reflect a lot of red. So if I calculate the difference in between those two, I have what we call the normalized difference vegetation index, NDVI. And it basically tells if my plant is healthy or not. Sometimes it is correlated with nitrogen, so people use it for determining on how much nitrogen to put on corn, for example. So this is precision agriculture, okay? And there's one difference. I showed that picture. As much down I go, more resolution I have. So that's an example. This is a satellite image, and this is a drone image. Okay, digital agriculture now. So I explained about precision, right? Remote sensing and everything. But here is digital agriculture. I have the remote sensing. I have the IoT, which is Internet of Things. I have big data, which is a lot of data collected by sensors. I have automation. I have artificial intelligence. I have machine learning. I have computer vision, and I have deep learning, everything together, working together. So that's what we call, this is the connected agriculture. One example, this is data from a planter, from a John Deere planter equipped with a precision planting system. From here, you see hybrid, you see like population, hybrid, planter speed, elevation, planting date, singulation, spacing, downforce, apply and downforce. You have soil temperature, organic matter, catch and exchange capacity. You have all this data collected by one sensor. And that's the map that it can create. So here, let me see, what is this? I think that this is, yeah. So this is the organic matter map created by that planter right at planting time. And here's the harvest map. Can you see some correlations on yield and organic matter? Yes, right? So that's how digital agriculture can help us, collecting this big amount of data and transforming it into information. Let's go to specialty crops now. How can I put all these data together? So there are something we call digital agriculture platforms. They do that for you. You just collect the data, you fly the drone, and then you upload your images to this kind of platforms, and then they give you the information for you. In this case here, I just collected some examples. Here's a cabbage field, and this is a plant count. And here's, I think, is a citrus field. And here they are counting the number of trees that they have, but also measuring the diameter of the crown of the tree, okay? Another example of the cabbage field, they can measure the head, the size of the leaf, depending on the quality of the image that the drone collected. Here is an AgroView farm. This is a platform. Yanis Empatsidis, he's a professor at the University of Florida. He just released this platform, and this is for citrus. Here's a Bee Hero. It's a platform that counts the visits that the bees made to the fields. Okay, just for us to think. First auto steer system came out in US in between 1995 and 2000s. Today, different than back in the past, robots, they are using not only the GPS, but they are like taking decisions. They are perceiving the fields. I'm gonna show you some robots in a minute, but today, these robots, you send them out to the field. If there is an obstacle like an animal or something like that, the robot is gonna send you a text and say, hey, there's a dog here. What should I do? And then you honk the horn, the dogs go. I would say a bucket. There's a bucket here, what should I do? So they're perceiving the fields, and I'm gonna show you some examples. This is just the data about like how many robots we have in the fields today. And I selected some future research that I'm gonna do. I'm gonna come back to this really quick. Drones in agriculture. If my video plays, that would be awesome. So let's see here. Yeah, that was a video of a drone flying over the fields. That's the same drone. That was a liquid one, and here is a solid, like you can plant cover crops with the drones. I hope this one plays. Sorry guys, my videos are not playing. Yeah, so this is a robot. It's called a burro. It's a payload robot. It can carry up to 1,000 pounds. So by harvest time, you can put I would say, blueberry harvest on this robot, and it goes all the way out to the line. People unload it, and it goes back where it was before. Here's another type of robot. This is a modular one. You can do anything with that one. You can put, this is a fertilizer spreader. This is a propane tank with some burners for kill weeds. This is a wheelbarrow. So another example. This one is a spraying robot. So this is a future research that I'm gonna do. We already have this in Tifton, and it can carry 41 gallons. Also is equipped with a mower. So when you are not spraying, you can mow your fields. So we're gonna do some trials with that, comparing with the drone and also comparing with the conventional spraying systems. This is one trial that we're gonna do this year. Let's see if this one is gonna play. Do we have internet here, Zach? Okay, I had more things to show, but my videos are not playing. I'm so sorry. I should have done this before and try it. So, oh, yeah, right there. So, this is a new system that is coming to the market. Me and Zilfina, the blueberry specialist, we're talking with this company from Israel. They have this equipment that vibrates the stem of the blueberry trees to increase pollination. Okay, they're gonna come this year to US. They're gonna do some trials in Florida, here in Georgia, Michigan, and Washington. So by the end of the year, we should have some results on if this tool is beneficial or not. Oops.
Our technology mimics the buzz of the bumblebee, the natural pollinator. We use mechanical arms mounted on an electric vehicle that vibrate the stems to release pollen grains on their stigmas. We've spent years researching and testing the frequency and velocity of the vibration for optimal efficiency. But that's not all. We've also developed a predictive algorithm that tells growers exactly when is the best time to pollinate based on environment.
So hopefully my previous videos then are gonna play right now. Nope. So yes, we're gonna bring that equipment. I forgot to mention, I have an 80% extension appointment. So my position requires me to do a lot of applied research. But along with that, I'm doing also, starting my basic research, which is creating information for the blueberry growers. And I'm gonna show right now what my plans are for that. So we have 3 proposals on it right now. The first one is to evaluate autonomous robotic and drone spraying systems in small fruits. So that's gonna be blueberry mainly, and comparing it with conventional systems. That's gonna be drone spraying versus robotic spraying versus the conventional boom sprayer or air blast spraying that you guys do on blueberries. Second one is gonna be multi-resolution remote sensing platforms to determine blueberry fruit quality. So we're gonna do drone imagery and correlate those vegetation indexes with fruit quality and yield. We're gonna try to predict the yield using drones. And also use the drones to predict or to prevent drip irrigation fault and clogging. How we're gonna do that? We're gonna use those thermal cameras that detect heat and check where the system is clogged or where the system has a break or something like that. Okay, and the last one, the last one is gonna be about blueberry mechanical harvesting. I saw that there was a talk here about that, and this is from a paper, and I forgot to put the title here, but it's basically saying that the time of the day and the maturity of the fruit are gonna influence the harvesting, are gonna influence the force of the detachment of the fruit from the plant. And this is from coffee, not from blueberries, but what I can say is that the harvester, the machine is pretty much the same. That you have those nails that vibrate, and depending on the detachment force that the plant needs to detach those fruits, you're going to have to increase or decrease that vibration. So we're going to do some research with that as well. If there's one here, anybody here on the crowd that have any, I would say, precision ag related need for blueberry production, you can just reach me out. I have some cards, and you can let me know. Thank you.
Is there any questions for Luan?
What kind of blueberry harvesting have you been able to reach into for the?
Oh, like nothing yet, none yet. So that's all the things that I showed here right now. They are future plans because when I started back in August, I could not find, I would say, available machinery for me to do some research. But I'm going to start this year.
Are there any other questions? I wore the wrong shoes today.
Luan, I enjoyed your presentation. I can't wait to see what you find out in the next few years. I had a question about your spray technology. Now, down in Chile, I've seen them using aerial systems for spraying as opposed to the rover type. Is there a reason why you're looking at the rover versus using some sort of aerial system?
Yes. As I mentioned there, from the extension standpoint, those spraying robots, they're being released a lot on the market. And they are, I would say, fairly cheap compared with conventional. So producers are gonna be using more and more those in the future. So the reason why is that I want to know if they're reliable as of now. What is the spraying efficiency, the spraying efficacy compared with the drones and compared with conventional systems. And they can work 24/7. So a drone can't. You can send a sprayer like that, which is a 150-liter tank to spray, and that can spray, if you are spraying a low volume, it can spray pretty much the whole night. And a drone can't, because a drone needs the operator. So that's why I'm leaning more towards these autonomous systems. That's completely possible for the future, and that's a research need. I'm going to take notes on it, and in the future when we have, today they are starting to sell these autonomous systems for kits. You can, right now, the company's name is Sabanto Ag. We're going to have one for Tifton as well, but I'm going to use it for pecans only on mowing operations. But these autonomous kits, they convert conventional machines, as you said, into autonomous ones. So that's going to be completely possible in the future, sending a blueberry harvester to harvest and place those sensors. And if something's wrong, a signal on your phone is going to pop up and say, hey, I broke, or something like that. I'm sorry, I buy the videos. I wish I could show you that. I'm going to have the same presentation on some of these technologies tomorrow morning for vegetables, and I'm going to make sure that those videos are going to work. So please stop by. Thank you.